Dear Naruto Lemon fans, I'm thrilled to invite all of you to my Boosty channel, where you can enjoy exclusive Naruto Lemon scenes in a comfortable and supportive community. Choose from various subscription tiers, from Mini Lemon to God Lemon, and gain access to unique content tailored just for our fans. Plus, subscribers to over Naruto Lemon and God Lemon will receive special mentions in my videos. Support my channel and dive deeper into the world of Naruto today. Dare! My story. Chapter 1: The Awakening of a True Shinobi. The night over the hidden leaf was eerily silent. Even the wind, usually a constant whisper in the village, seemed to pause in anticipation. Naruto Uzumaki stood atop the Hokage monument, the faces of previous leaders stretched below him in stone, their eyes forever watching over the village they had protected. Tonight, he wasn't looking at them. He wasn't even looking at the village. His gaze was turned inward, to a place far deeper than any battlefield. Is this really enough? He thought, his fists trembling slightly. After everything, is it enough to just protect them? Or do I need to become something more? He closed his eyes. The years flashed behind his eyelids, Irika's encouragement, Jiraiya's teachings, the pain of Sasuke's departure, the battles against Akatsuki, the war against Madara and Kagaya. Each memory burned brightly, a reminder of what he had fought for. Kurama's voice rumbled inside him, calm but firm. There's still more, kid. You want to carry everyone's hopes? You'll need more than brute strength. Naruto nodded silently. He wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The transformation began, slow but unstoppable. Natural energy from the world around him surged inward, merging not just with his body, but with his very soul. The chakra of Kurama flowed alongside it, no longer two conflicting forces, but a perfect harmony. And deep beneath that, an ancient resonance stirred. Something even older than sage power or tailed beasts. The ground beneath him vibrated. The stars above shimmered, their light bending, as if acknowledging his awakening. Naruto opened his eyes. They no longer held the bright, wild blue of his youth. They glowed with a deep, warm radiance, a color that defied description, as if the heavens themselves reflected in them. Down below, at the foot of the monument, Kakashi Hatake tilted his head upward. Beside him, Hinata Hyuga clutched her hands together, her Byakugan flaring involuntarily as she sensed the sudden, overwhelming pulse of chakra. That's Naruto, Kakashi murmured. His voice held a mixture of pride and unease. He had felt powerful shinobi before. He had fought alongside legends. But this was something different. His chakra. Hinata whispered, wide-eyed. It feels endless. Around the village, other Jonin and ANBU operatives stirred, feeling the tremors in the energy around them. Some reached instinctively for their weapons. Others simply froze, recognizing the raw, undeniable presence flowing from the monument like a tidal wave. Naruto took a step forward, feeling the earth itself respond to his movement. It wasn't power he had stolen or borrowed. It was his own. It was the sum of everything he had lived through, fought for, and believed in. And yet, a heavy knot formed in his chest. If I'm this strong, he thought, staring at the twinkling lights of the village below. Will they still see me as Naruto, or something else? He descended the monument slowly, his steps light but resonating with unseen force. By the time he reached the training grounds at the edge of the village, a small crowd had already gathered, Kurenai, Shikamaru, Konohamaru, even Irika. They all stared at him. Not with fear. Not with hostility. But with awe. And something else. Distance. The first to move was Kakashi. He approached with his usual relaxed posture, but Naruto could see the tension in his shoulders, the careful measure in his steps. "You're different," Kakashi said, lifting his forehead protector slightly to reveal the Sharingan. His voice was light, almost teasing, but the Sharingan was not a casual move. Naruto gave a small, sheepish smile. "You think?" Kakashi chuckled, but the sound was hollow. "Difference not bad. Just, new. Very new." Hinata stepped forward, her eyes wide with emotion. She reached out, her fingers trembling, before pulling her hand back at the last second. "You're still Naruto," she said quietly. As if saying it aloud would make it stay true. Naruto wanted to believe her. More than anything, he wanted to. But behind her words, he could see it. The flicker of doubt. The silent question everyone was too afraid to ask. Is he still one of us? Far away, beyond the borders of the Fire Country, in hidden chambers and secret war rooms, others were asking the same question, but with far more fear. In the land of lightning, the Raikage smashed his fist into a stone table, cracking it in two. "Monitor the leaf," he growled to his advisors. "If they think they can hoard that kind of power alone, they're mistaken." In the land of water, the Mizukage sat silently, her fingers steepled, deep in thought. In the shadows of the ruined Akatsuki hideouts, forgotten experiments and desperate survivors stirred. The world had felt the change. And it would not stay silent. Back in Konoha, Naruto stood before his friends, unsure of what to say. Words felt too small. Too useless. He clenched his fists. "I didn't become strong to be feared," he thought. "I became strong to protect them." But even as he vowed that to himself, a cold whisper slid into the edges of his mind. Power isolates. And as Naruto Uzumaki, the strongest shinobi the world had ever known, faced the people he loved most, he realized the true battle was only beginning. Chapter 2, First Tremors. The following morning dawned gray and cold. Naruto stood on the roof of the Hokage's office, watching the village below come to life. Merchants setting up their stalls. Children rushing to the academy. From this height, everything looked the same. But it wasn't. He could feel it, a subtle shift in the air, like the village itself was holding its breath. Behind him, Kakashi approached with 2 cups of tea, offering one silently. Naruto took it, grateful for the normalcy of the gesture. "You're famous again," Kakashi said lightly, glancing down at the bustling streets. "But not in the way you used to be." Naruto grimaced. "Yeah. I noticed." He could feel the eyes on him wherever he went now, not just admiration or curiosity like when he was younger, but caution. Respect, laced with fear. It was suffocating. "I didn't want this," Naruto muttered, setting his untouched tea aside. "I just wanted to protect everyone. Like Dad did." Kakashi's visible eyes softened. Power changes everything. Even intentions. A heavy silence fell between them. Finally, Kakashi straightened. "Come with me," he said. "There's something you need to see." They moved swiftly through the village, past nodding villagers and wary glances, until they reached the Intelligence Division headquarters. In a dimly lit briefing room, Shikamaru, Sai, and several ANBU captains waited. A large map of the shinobi world was spread across the table, marked with fresh red pins. Shikamaru didn't waste time. "We intercepted multiple communications overnight," he said, pointing at the marks. "Other villages felt your event." Naruto winced inwardly at the term. "They're nervous. Some are calling emergency councils. Some are increasing patrols. And there are rumors." Shikamaru hesitated, his normally lazy tone tightening. "Rumors that alliances are being formed. Secret ones." Naruto felt a pit form in his stomach. "They think I'm a threat," he said quietly. Shikamaru didn't deny it. Even Sai, usually so emotionally neutral, looked grim. The world's been balanced on a knife's edge since the Fourth Great Ninja War, Sai said. One person upsetting that balance, it's terrifying to them. Naruto looked around the room, at the faces of his friends, comrades, and allies. There was no hostility in their eyes. But there was worry. And maybe, a sliver of doubt. Later that day, as Naruto walked the streets, pretending everything was normal, a sudden presence brushed against his senses. He froze. Not normal. Not familiar. A foreign chakra signature, fast, slippery, masked. He turned a corner just in time to catch a glimpse, a figure clad in dark gray armor, face hidden by a blank mask, vanishing into the crowd. Spy, Naruto muttered under his breath. Without hesitation, he launched forward, weaving through the startled civilians. The figure darted into a narrow alley, moving with shinobi-level precision. Naruto pursued. His enhanced senses tracking the faint trail of chakra left behind. The alley twisted and narrowed until it opened into a dead-end courtyard. The masked figure stood waiting, a kunai in each hand, stance defensive. Naruto slowed, cautious. I don't want to fight, Naruto said, hands raised slightly. Who sent you? The figure didn't answer. Instead, with a sharp twist, they launched a barrage of explosive tags toward Naruto. Without thinking, Naruto weaved a single-hand sign. The tags froze midair, suspended by a thin layer of invisible chakra. With a casual flick of his wrist, he redirected them skyward, where they detonated harmlessly. The figure hesitated, a fatal mistake. In an instant, Naruto was in front of them, pinning them to the wall with a single hand on their chest. The figure struggled, but Naruto's grip was absolute. He reached up and pulled off the mask. Underneath was a young shinobi, maybe 17, with fear wide in his eyes. Who sent you? Naruto repeated, softer this time. The boy trembled. The hidden rock, and the hidden cloud. They said you had to be watched, that if you started to move, we had to stop you. Naruto released him, stepping back. The boy collapsed to the ground, gasping. Naruto stared down at him, heart sinking. This was just the beginning. Back at the Hokage's office, Naruto sat in silence as Kakashi read the spy's report. They're scared, Kakashi said simply. And scared people do stupid things. Naruto leaned forward, resting his forehead against his clasped hands. I didn't want this. I didn't want to be feared. But now, whether he liked it or not, the world saw him not as a savior. Not even as a hero. They saw him as a weapon. And sooner or later, someone would try to destroy that weapon. Naruto stood up, his expression hardening. If they're coming, he said, then we need to be ready. Kakashi met his gaze, nodding slowly. The hidden leaf would not wait for war to come to their doorstep. Chapter 3, First Shadows of War. Days passed, but the tension in the air only thickened. It wasn't just the higher patrols around the village, or the sudden surge in diplomatic visits from envoys of other villages. It was something deeper, a slow, creeping sense of mistrust that even Naruto couldn't fight head-on. For the first time since the war, the shinobi world was preparing for conflict again. And this time, it wasn't against a common enemy. It was against him. Inside the Hokage's conference room, Naruto sat stiffly at a long wooden table. Beside him, Kakashi, Shikamaru, and Sai. Across from them, 3 foreign envoys, one from the hidden stone, one from the hidden cloud, and one from the hidden mist. The atmosphere was ice-cold. The envoy from the hidden stone, a broad-shouldered man with deep scars across his jaw, spoke first. We come with concerns, he said bluntly. Concerns about the unchecked power rising from Konoha. Naruto didn't flinch. He met the man's gaze evenly. I haven't attacked anyone, Naruto said calmly. I haven't threatened anyone. The envoy from the hidden mist, a sharp-eyed woman, leaned forward. You haven't had to. Your existence alone is enough to disrupt balance. And balance keeps peace, added the hidden cloud representative, a thin, wary man with a perpetual scowl. When one village holds too much power, war becomes inevitable. Naruto's fists clenched under the table. I didn't ask for this, he thought bitterly. I didn't become strong to threaten them. But reality didn't care about intentions. Reality cared about fear. Kakashi spoke up, his voice measured. Konoha has no intention of using Naruto's strength aggressively, he said. We are prepared to maintain peace through transparency and cooperation. The stone envoy scoffed. Easy words. Harder to believe when the earth itself trembles at his footsteps. The meeting ended in strained silence. As the envoys left, Shikamaru turned to Naruto, his face serious. You handled that better than I expected, he said. Naruto gave a humorless smile. I wanted to punch the table. I know, Shikamaru said dryly. We all wanted to. That night, the first attack came. Under cover of darkness, a squad of masked shinobi infiltrated the outskirts of Konoha. They were good, fast, silent, deadly. But they hadn't accounted for Naruto. The alarm bells hadn't even finished ringing before Naruto was on them. In a blur of motion, he intercepted them near the southern wall, Rasengan forming instinctively in his hand. The masked intruders scattered, trying to evade, but Naruto's senses extended like a living net, tracking every movement. He disabled the first with a bone-jarring blow to the chest. The second with a sharp twist of chakra that pinned their legs to the ground. Only one made it as far as the trees, trying to flee into the night. Naruto caught him with a single wordless flicker, body flicker technique, enhanced beyond human limits. He grabbed the fleeing shinobi by the collar and slammed him against a tree. The mask cracked, revealing a familiar headband, Hidden Cloud. Naruto's stomach twisted. Why? He demanded. The shinobi grimaced, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Too powerful. He gasped. Too dangerous, must eliminate before you become like them. Naruto's blood ran cold. Like them. He didn't need to ask who. Madara. Kagaya. Monsters who had once sought to bend the world under their power. They saw him the same way now. A potential tyrant. After the skirmish, Naruto stood atop the southern wall, staring into the night. The captured intruders had been taken into ANBU custody. Interrogations would follow. But Naruto already knew what they would say. Fear. Mistrust. Desperation. The first shadows of war had already fallen. And he, Naruto Uzumaki, protector of the leaf, had become the spark that could ignite it. Far away, beyond mountains and oceans, in a darkened cavern beneath the earth, a figure watched a shimmering pool of water with unblinking eyes. The figure smiled faintly. The world trembles, good. The boy shines too brightly. He must be extinguished. With a wave of a hand, the figure disappeared into the darkness. Chapter 4, Breaking Points. Days turned into weeks. And each day, the tension in the shinobi world thickened like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Konoha's gates remained open, its streets busy, its people trying desperately to pretend life was normal. But Naruto could feel it, a pressure building around the village, suffocating in its intensity. Every foreign merchant could be a spy. Every friendly envoy could be an assassin. Every diplomatic smile hid sharpened daggers behind the teeth. Inside the Hokage's war room, Kakashi, Shikamaru, and a few elite jonin pored over reports. Naruto stood at the edge, arms crossed, jaw clenched. The news was bad. Very bad. Shikamaru tapped a spot on the map where 3 countries' borders converged. They're calling it a joint training exercise, he said dryly. Hidden stone, hidden cloud, hidden mist. Units gathering here. Thousands. Kakashi's voice was grim. That's not training. It's mobilization. Naruto exhaled slowly. They're preparing for war. Silence fell across the room. No one said it. But everyone thought it. War against us. War against Naruto. Later that night, Naruto sat alone on the roof of his apartment, legs dangling over the edge. Kurama's voice rumbled inside him, more serious than usual. You're holding back. Naruto didn't answer. They fear you because they think you're hiding your true strength, Kurama continued. And you are. Naruto stared up at the stars, cold and distant. If I show them everything. He thought, won't that only make things worse? He could feel it, the raw, unstoppable power coursing inside him, tightly coiled, barely restrained. Power that could shatter armies. Power that could crush mountains. He hated it. He hated that it even tempted him. Kurama growled lowly. Hiding it won't change their fear. Showing it won't either. Their hearts are already poisoned. Naruto's fists tightened. He didn't want to be feared. He didn't want to be worshipped. He just wanted to be Naruto. But the world didn't seem willing to let him. Across the village, in the ANBU headquarters, Shikamaru spoke quietly to Kakashi. This can't last, he said. The pressure's building too fast. Either we break, or they will. Kakashi nodded, his expression hidden behind his mask. And Naruto? Shikamaru exhaled smoke from a thin cigarette, the ember glowing in the dark. If we're lucky, he stays Naruto. He crushed the cigarette underfoot. If not, we'll be dealing with something even the 5 great nations together can't stop. Neither man said the word. They didn't have to. God. A god born from the hope of the village, or a god that would crush the world under the weight of loneliness and betrayal. The next morning, it started. Whispers in the streets. Rumors spreading like wildfire. They say the Hokage's brat is a monster. They say he can destroy a village with a single thought. They say he'll snap any day now. Naruto heard them all. Every word. Every lie. He walked through the village with his head high, pretending not to notice. But each word was a knife between the ribs. Hinata met him outside Ichiraku Ramen, her face pale, her hands twisting the hem of her jacket. They don't know you, she said fiercely. They're wrong. Naruto smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Maybe. He thought. But fear doesn't need the truth. Only an excuse. And the world was full of excuses. Far beyond Konoha, the coalition of villages finalized their plans. In a stone fortress deep in the mountains, the leaders of the Hidden Stone, Hidden Mist, and Hidden Cloud met in secret. The Raikage slammed his fist into the table. We attack first, he growled. Before he becomes unstoppable. The Mizukage frowned. But what if he surrenders peacefully? The Tsuchikage, old and grim, shook his head. Peace is no longer an option. He is too great a risk. And so it was decided. The shinobi world would move against the leaf. Against Naruto Uzumaki. Meanwhile, in the dark cavern hidden under the earth, the true enemy smiled wider, watching the chaos unfold. The boy had power. The world had fear. All was proceeding perfectly. Soon, the real storm would break. And not even Naruto Uzumaki would be able to stop it. Chapter 5, The First Strike. The attack came at dawn. The first explosions rocked the southern wall of Konoha just as the morning mist was beginning to lift. Smoke and dust billowed into the air, blotting out the weak sunlight. Naruto was already moving before the second blast shook the earth. From his rooftop vantage point, he could see them, dozens, no, hundreds of shinobi pouring out of the forest, bearing the symbols of the Hidden Stone, the hidden mist, and the hidden cloud. The Allied forces had come. Within minutes, the village erupted into coordinated defense. ANBU squads moved swiftly to intercept infiltrators. Barrier teams activated defensive seals. Medical ninja rushed to their posts, anticipating casualties. Naruto landed in the middle of the chaos, his presence immediately felt by friend and foe alike. He scanned the battlefield, heart pounding. They weren't targeting the village's resources. They weren't even aiming for critical structures. They were coming straight for him. He could see it in their movements, entire squads moving in perfect synchronization, designed to funnel him into traps, to wear him down. This wasn't a raid. This was an execution. Kakashi appeared at Naruto's side, Sharingan blazing under his forehead protector. "They're not holding back," he said grimly. Naruto clenched his fists. "I won't either." Kurama stirred within him. "Be careful, Naruto. You show them everything now, and you might lose more than just a fight." Naruto nodded silently. He knew. If he unleashed all of it, the full force of what he had become, there would be no battlefield left to fight on. There would only be ruins. And corpses. The first wave hit hard. High-ranking Jonin from the hidden mist launched a barrage of water dragons toward him, aiming to drown the area in crushing force. Naruto weaved a single sign and slammed his palm against the ground. A golden barrier, woven from natural energy and Kurama's chakra, blossomed around him, absorbing the impact. The second wave followed, hidden stone shinobi manipulating the ground itself, turning the street into jagged spikes aimed at skewering him. Naruto leapt into the air, spinning mid-flight, releasing a volley of miniature raisin shuriken to neutralize the attack. The hidden cloud's elite struck next, flashing through the air with lightning-enhanced speed, aiming to overwhelm him through sheer velocity. For a moment, Naruto faltered. Not because they were too strong, but because he recognized them. These were shinobi he had fought alongside during the Fourth Great Ninja War. Shinobi he had saved. Now they came to kill him. Naruto landed hard, scattering the attackers with a shockwave of chakra. "Why?" he shouted, voice ringing through the battlefield. A kunoichi from the stone, face hidden behind a mask, answered bitterly. "For the sake of peace. For the future. We can't risk another Madara." Another shinobi added, voice hoarse. "We can't trust gods." Naruto's chest tightened painfully. "I'm not a god. I'm just Naruto." But it didn't matter anymore. In their eyes, he was no longer the same boy who had once been ignored, mocked, hated. He had become a symbol. And symbols were easier to destroy than people. Kakashi appeared beside him again, panting. "The barriers won't hold much longer," he said. "The main forces are focusing everything on you. They're leaving the rest of the village mostly untouched." Naruto understood immediately. This wasn't just an invasion. This was a sacrifice. They were willing to lose hundreds, thousands of shinobi if it meant taking him down. A necessary evil. A small sacrifice for peace. Naruto's hands shook. Not from fear. From rage. From sorrow. "I fought for them. I bled for them. And now, they throw everything away because they're afraid." Kurama's voice cut through the haze of emotions. "Naruto. You know what you must do. But if you cross the line, you can't go back." Naruto breathed deeply, centering himself. He wouldn't destroy them. He wouldn't become what they feared. But he wouldn't let himself, or Konoha, be crushed either. With a roar that shook the heavens, Naruto unleashed a controlled burst of chakra. Golden energy surged around him, rising into a spiraling dome of raw power. But he kept it tight, focused, refusing to let it spill out destructively. Enemies faltered. Some dropped their weapons outright. Others stood frozen, paralyzed by the sheer oppressive force radiating from him. Naruto raised his hand. Above him, hundreds of miniature Rasengan spun into existence, each humming with devastating potential. He spoke, his voice carrying across the battlefield. "I don't want to kill any of you," Naruto said. "But I won't let you destroy my home. Leave now. Or face the consequences." For a heartbeat, the battlefield froze. Then, retreat. The first squads broke. Then the second. Within minutes, the attack collapsed into disarray. When the dust settled, Naruto stood alone at the heart of the battlefield, his cloak of golden energy fading into the morning light. Kakashi approached slowly, surveying the damage, minimal, miraculously. Thanks to Naruto's restraint. "You did it," Kakashi said quietly. Naruto didn't answer immediately. He stared at the broken ground, at the discarded weapons, at the symbols of former allies turned enemies. "No," he thought bitterly. "I didn't win anything." He had saved Konoha. But the world's trust, that was already broken. Far away, in the hidden cavern, the dark figure laughed softly. "Good," he whispered. "The cracks have begun. And soon, Naruto Uzumaki would either break the world, or be broken by it." Chapter 6, The Gathering Storm. The attack on Konoha should have ended the tensions. It didn't. If anything, it made things worse. The allied villages retreated, licking their wounds, but they didn't disband. Instead, their leaders doubled down on preparations, summoning more forces, forging more alliances, sharpening their blades for the inevitable second strike. From the land of lightning to the land of earth, the drums of war beat louder with every passing day. And the world began to fracture. Inside Konoha, the atmosphere shifted. At first, it was subtle, a slight hesitation in the way villagers greeted Naruto, a few more glances over shoulders when he passed. But soon, it became impossible to ignore. Whispers filled the streets. "He's too dangerous. What if they come again because of him? Maybe we should send him away." Naruto heard it all. And every word cut deeper than any blade. In the Hokage's office, Kakashi slammed a report onto the desk, his usual calm broken. "This is madness," he snapped. The council sat stiffly around the room, senior jonin, village elders, clan heads. One of the elders, a gaunt old man with a hawk-like nose, spoke coldly. "The boy is powerful. Too powerful. If keeping him here endangers the village, then perhaps, other arrangements must be made." Naruto stood silently at the side of the room, fists clenched, forcing himself not to react. "They're afraid of me," he realized bitterly. "Even my own people." Hinata, standing quietly near the back, looked ready to protest, but Shikamaru subtly touched her arm, signaling her to wait. Kakashi's voice was steel. "If you think Naruto is the danger, you're bigger fools than I thought. Without him, this village would already be ashes." The council muttered among themselves, but no one openly challenged Kakashi. Not yet. That night, Naruto sat alone on the cliffs overlooking the village. He had always dreamed of being acknowledged. Of being seen. But not like this. Never like this. Kurama spoke inside him, a low growl of frustration. "You can't carry them all, Naruto. You never could." Naruto didn't answer. He didn't have the strength. Far away, in the deepest caves beneath the earth, the true architect of the coming war moved. He wore robes of deep gray, embroidered with ancient symbols long forgotten by mortal men. His eyes glowed faintly, not Sharingan, not Byakugan, but something older, more primal. Before him knelt a group of shadowed figures, rogue shinobi, disillusioned warriors, the lost and the damned. He spoke, his voice a whisper that echoed like a roar. "The great error of the sage shall be corrected. The age of weakness shall end. We shall bring the world back to its rightful shape. The followers bowed lower. The leader stepped forward, raising an ancient staff, its surface carved with runes of power. The first key, he intoned, is to break the false shinobi. He lifted a hand, and in the pool of water before him, an image formed. Naruto Uzumaki. Radiant. Alone. The leader smiled darkly. The Nine-Tails vessel will shatter. And from his ruins, a new world shall rise. Back in Konoha, Naruto stood as a silent sentinel, feeling the storm gathering on every side. Friends growing distant. Enemies closing in. The world he had fought so hard to protect crumbling beneath his feet. And yet, despite it all, he stood. Because that's what Naruto Uzumaki did. No matter what. Chapter 7, Seeds of Rebellion. The betrayal began in whispers. And then it grew into knives. It started small, secret meetings in the dark corners of the village, hushed conversations behind closed doors. Chunin, Jonin, even a few clan elders, once fiercely loyal to Konoha, now questioning whether their village could survive with Naruto Uzumaki at its heart. They weren't traitors. Not yet. They were afraid. And fear made traitors of everyone, given enough time. Naruto sensed it immediately. Not through some jutsu. Not through kurama. Through the change in the way people looked at him. The careful avoidance of eye contact. The sudden silences when he entered a room. The way even longtime comrades hesitated before standing by his side. It hurt more than any blade. In the Hokage's tower, Kakashi and Shikamaru argued heatedly behind closed doors. "They're organizing," Shikamaru said, his voice low but urgent. "Small groups at first. Talking about forcing Naruto into exile, or worse." Kakashi's hands clenched on the windowsill. "And you think they'll act?" Shikamaru exhaled slowly. "I don't think. I know. They were too late." That night, under the pale light of a half-moon, a small group of masked shinobi made their move. They struck at Naruto's home with speed and precision, disabling seals, using silent techniques meant for capture, not killing. They didn't want him dead. They wanted him gone. Naruto awoke the moment the first intruder set foot inside. In an instant, he was on his feet, kunai flashing into his hand. The masked shinobi froze, barely a moment of hesitation, then charged. Naruto dodged the first strike, disarmed the second, and pinned the third against the wall in a blur of motion. "Stop," he barked, voice crackling with suppressed power. For a moment, they hesitated. Then, from behind them, another figure stepped forward, unmasked. A man Naruto recognized. Ibisu. A senior jonin. One of his early tutors. Ibisu's face was lined with regret and grim determination. "Naruto," he said quietly, "for the good of the village, you have to leave." Naruto stared at him, heart pounding. "You really believe that?" he whispered. Ibisu flinched. "It's not you. It's your power. You're too dangerous. You're a target we can't protect." Around them, the masked shinobi shifted uneasily. They didn't want this. But they had convinced themselves it was necessary. Naruto slowly lowered his kunai. He could kill them all in a heartbeat. He knew it. They knew it. But he didn't move. Instead, he spoke, his voice steady, but filled with a sadness deeper than the ocean. "I fought for this village. I bled for it. I nearly died for it. And now you want to throw me away because you're scared?" No one answered. Because there was no answer. Only silence. Only shame. Kurama growled deep within him. "Say the word," the beast rumbled. "And I'll make them remember why they should fear you." Naruto closed his eyes briefly. "No. He wasn't a tyrant. He wouldn't become the monster they feared. Even if it cost him everything. Slowly, Naruto stepped aside, clearing a path to the door. "If you want me gone," he said, "I'll go." Ibisu's shoulders sagged in visible relief. The others relaxed slightly. But Naruto wasn't finished. "I'll go," he repeated, "but know this, when the real threat comes, when the one behind all this reveals himself." He opened his eyes, and for a moment, the sheer weight of his gaze made every shinobi in the room flinch. "You'll need me. And if you still see me as a threat then." He smiled, a sad, broken smile. "You're already lost." Without another word, Naruto walked out into the night, leaving everything behind. From a rooftop high above, a shadowed figure watched him go. The dark-robed leader smiled behind his mask. "Good," he murmured. "The roots of rebellion have been planted. Soon, the great tree will fall." He turned and vanished into the darkness, leaving only the cold whisper of betrayal behind. Chapter 8, Exile. The forest outside the hidden leaf was silent. Naruto walked alone under the ancient trees, each step taking him farther away from the village he had once sworn to protect with his life. No farewell. No ceremony. No promise of return. Just silence. And exile. The days blurred together. Naruto moved through the wilderness like a ghost, avoiding roads, avoiding people. Not because he feared attack. Because he feared himself. Kurama's voice occasionally rumbled in the back of his mind, low and brooding. "They betrayed you. They abandoned you. You owe them nothing." Naruto didn't argue. He didn't agree either. He was too tired to fight. Too tired to justify the dream he once lived for. Maybe they were right, he thought bitterly, staring up at the canopy of stars one night. Maybe I am too dangerous. Weeks passed. Naruto journeyed farther than he ever had before, beyond the known borders of the 5 great nations, into lands where the maps ended and myths began. He crossed barren deserts, where the wind whispered forgotten secrets. He climbed frozen mountains, where the air itself tried to strip away his spirit. He wandered through forgotten ruins, remnants of a world that had once known gods. And had buried them. Everywhere he went, he found the same thing. Silence. Loneliness. Reflection. One evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, Naruto stumbled upon a broken shrine hidden deep within a valley. The stones were ancient, weathered by time beyond memory. Strange symbols, older even than the Sage of 6 Paths, were etched into the walls. At the center of the shrine stood a cracked mirror, its surface dulled by centuries of dust and neglect. Naruto approached it slowly, heart pounding. Without knowing why, he reached out and touched the surface. The world shifted. For a moment, he wasn't standing in the valley. He was standing inside the mirror. And staring back at him wasn't the Naruto Uzumaki the world knew. It was a reflection twisted by power unchecked. Eyes cold and merciless. A smile that held no warmth, only judgment. The mirror Naruto spoke. "You can't save them," it said softly. "You can only rule them." Naruto staggered back, heart racing. "No," he whispered. "That's not me." The reflection laughed. "Not yet." The image shattered, scattering into the wind. Naruto fell to his knees, gasping. Later that night, he sat by a small fire, staring into the flames. Kurama was silent for once, leaving Naruto alone with his thoughts. "If I stay here," he thought, "if I hide away, maybe they'll be safe." But another thought gnawed at him, cruel and persistent. "Or maybe, without me, they'll fall. And worse still. Maybe that's exactly what the enemy wants." Naruto looked up at the stars, the firelight flickering in his tired eyes. He had a choice. Hide. Or fight. Not for himself. Not even for their approval. But for the dream he had once believed in, a world where people didn't have to be afraid anymore. A world worth protecting, even if they hated him for it. Slowly, painfully, Naruto stood. His legs trembled. His heart ached. But he stood. Because that's what Naruto Uzumaki did. No matter what. Far away, in Konoha, the first signs of the true enemy's moves began to surface, strange disappearances, reports of rogue forces gathering. The storm was coming. And Konoha had exiled its strongest protector. Exactly as the enemy had planned. Chapter 9, Fangs in the Dark. The world that had once trembled at the clash of 5 great nations now held its breath, balanced on the knife's edge of annihilation. The fragile alliances, hastily forged in fear of one boy's strength, were beginning to rot from within, not by Naruto's doing, but by something far older, far crueler, and far more patient. The first sign of decay came not with the thunder of armies, but with silence. Outposts along the borders of the hidden stone began disappearing. Entire platoons sent to patrol the mountainous passes simply ceased to report back. The hidden mist lost a series of coastal villages, each swallowed overnight, leaving behind nothing but scorched earth and nameless ash drifting over the sea. At first, the leaders dismissed it as minor rebellions, rogue groups emboldened by the chaos Naruto's existence had supposedly triggered. But when even their elite tracker squads vanished without a whisper, fear crept into their war rooms, cold and suffocating, much like the unseen hand tightening around their throats. Within Konoha's battered council chambers, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Kakashi stood before the gathered elders and clan heads, reading aloud the grim reports from spies and informants, his voice calm but heavy with warning. Each word was another nail hammered into the coffin of their illusion of control. "We are not facing internal dissent alone," Kakashi said, letting the silence settle like a grave shroud. "Something is moving beyond our borders. Something none of our enemies expected." The council murmured uneasily, the old argument surfacing yet again, some calling for tighter defenses around the village core, others, more recklessly, demanding that Naruto be forcibly summoned back to serve as their shield, as if he were some mindless weapon they could deploy at will after having cast him out. Shikamaru, standing at Kakashi's side, rubbed his temples tiredly. Already foreseeing the inevitable fracture that would tear them apart from within if they continued to fight shadows with fear instead of unity. But Naruto was not there to guide them anymore. And fear, once it took root, grew faster than hope ever could. Far from the relative safety of Konoha, deep within the mountainous ruins that had once served as battlegrounds for forgotten wars, the true enemy stirred. The man known only to his followers as the first voice stood upon a crumbling stone altar, arms raised high, as dozens of rogues, renegades, and the lost knelt before him in silent reverence. The first voice was no mere warlord or power-hungry shinobi, he was a remnant, a fragment of an ideology far older than the current age of villages and hidden treaties. He was the embodiment of an ancient belief, that true order could only be born through absolute strength and absolute submission. Where Naruto Uzumaki dreamed of a world built on bonds, on the strength of heart and connection, the first voice sought a world stripped of choice, where peace was not something earned but something enforced by the crushing weight of power. In his right hand, he held the staff of Yomi, a relic from the primordial wars predating even the Sage of Six Paths' reign. The staff pulsed faintly with a malignant energy, resonating with the creeping corruption spreading across the world like a disease. He did not fear the armies of the 5 nations. He did not fear Naruto Uzumaki. He had foreseen all of this, the fear, the betrayal, the exile, and he smiled as the world stumbled blindly into his carefully laid trap. Soon, the false shinobi order would fall, not with an explosion, but with a slow, inevitable unraveling. In the darkness of a rain-slicked forest near the land of rivers, a platoon of hidden cloud shinobi marched in tight formation, their eyes darting nervously at every shadow. They had been sent to reinforce the northern flank against a potential Konoha retaliation. Instead, they found only death. It came without warning, a thick mist rolling in from nowhere, swallowing the forest in a blinding haze. One by one, the shinobi disappeared into the fog, not with screams or cries for help, but with the soft, sickening sound of flesh being torn from bone. When the mist finally lifted, nothing remained but blood-soaked earth and shattered kunai. No bodies. No survivors. No explanation. The commanders of the hidden cloud, upon receiving the report, simply burned it, refusing to acknowledge the truth even as terror rooted itself deep within their hearts. Meanwhile, far beyond the borders of civilization, Naruto stood atop a high cliff overlooking a vast valley bathed in twilight. The wind tugged at his jacket, carrying with it the sense of rain, distant fires, and something darker he could not yet name. He felt it, a disturbance not born of political tension, but something primal, something that gnawed at the very fabric of the world. Kurama stirred within him, restless. Something is coming, the beast growled. Something worse than your foolish villagers' fears. Naruto nodded grimly. He didn't know what it was yet. But he knew one thing. The world he loved, even the world that had rejected him, was under siege by something that made old rivalries, broken alliances, and personal betrayals seem laughably small. And he would not sit idly by while it burned. Naruto Uzumaki had left Konoha not because he was weak. He had left because they had asked him to. But now, he would return. Not to demand acceptance. Not to seek forgiveness. But to protect them, even if they hated him for it. Because that's what it meant to truly love something, to fight for it even when it no longer loved you back. Chapter 10, The Return of the Outcast. The road to Konoha was not the same one Naruto had walked as a boy. The familiar forests, once vibrant and full of life, now seemed subdued, the trees bending as if weighed down by invisible burdens. The rivers he had once raced beside now moved sluggishly, the waters reflecting a darkening sky that spoke of storms yet to break. Naruto walked steadily, each step deliberate. Each breath measured. He had not donned his old headband, nor the colors of the village he had once sworn to serve. There was no point in pretending that nothing had changed. He was no longer simply a shinobi of Konoha. He was something else now, something the world had yet to understand, and perhaps never would. Kurama, nestled deep within him, remained silent, though Naruto could feel the beast's heavy gaze upon every step he took. There was no need for words. They both knew what was coming. As Naruto approached the outer defenses of the village, he sensed them long before he saw them, dozens of shinobi concealed in the trees, hidden by genjutsu, by camouflage, by ancient defensive techniques. But they could not hide their intent. Fear. Distrust. A readiness to strike at a moment's notice. Naruto slowed, raising his hands openly, palms exposed, a silent signal that he came not as an attacker. For a long, breathless moment, the forest held its tension like a drawn bowstring, every shinobi waiting for the order to release. Then, from the shadows, Kakashi stepped forward. The sixth Hokage was clad not in formal robes but in his battle gear, Sharingan eye gleaming with caution. His expression was unreadable behind his mask, but his posture spoke volumes. Naruto halted a dozen paces away, meeting his gaze evenly. Kakashi spoke first, his voice low and even. "You picked a dangerous time to come back." Naruto smiled grimly. "I didn't come back to make it easier." Behind Kakashi, others began to emerge, Shikamaru, with his hands stuffed deep into his pockets but his eyes sharp with calculation, Sai, emotionless as ever, but his brush hand twitching slightly at his side, even Hinata, standing a step behind the front line, her face pale but set with determination. Naruto's heart twisted painfully at the sight of them. These were his friends. His family. And yet now they stood as a wall between him and the home he had once bled for. Kakashi studied him carefully, weighing 1,000 memories against the man standing before him now. "You should know," Kakashi said, "the council, they issued a warrant. If you step foot inside Konoha's core without authorization." He let the sentence trail off, unfinished but clear. Naruto didn't flinch. "I'm not here to kneel to the council," he said quietly. "I'm here because something worse is coming. Something bigger than your fear of me. And whether you believe me or not, it's coming for all of us." The words hung in the cold morning air like storm clouds. Shikamaru stepped forward slightly, his usual laziness replaced with a grim tension. "And if the council refuses to let you help?" he asked, voice devoid of malice but full of cold logic. "If they order us to treat you as an enemy?" Naruto's smile was small and weary. "Then I'll protect you anyway." For a long, agonizing moment, no one spoke. Then, finally, Kakashi sighed, a deep, bone-weary sound, and lowered his guard slightly. "You always were a pain in the ass," he said. Naruto chuckled under his breath, a sound that was more sadness than amusement. "Wouldn't be me otherwise." They let him pass. Not because they trusted him. Not because they welcomed him back. But because, somewhere deep beneath the layers of fear and suspicion, there still lingered a memory of a boy who had once refused to give up on them, no matter how many times the world told him to. And maybe, just maybe, they weren't ready to give up on him either. As Naruto walked through the gates of the village he had once dreamed of protecting, he felt the stares of hundreds of eyes upon him. Civilians pulled their children closer. Merchants paused in their bargaining, their voices dying mid-sentence. Young genin looked at him with a mixture of awe and terror, as if unsure whether they were witnessing a hero or a calamity given human form. Naruto kept his head high, his steps steady. He would not apologize for surviving. He would not apologize for fighting. He would not apologize for being strong. He was Naruto Uzumaki. And he was here to finish what he started. Not for glory. Not for recognition. But because. In the end, that was what he had always been. A protector. A stubborn, reckless, foolish protector. The last shield standing between the world and the darkness rising to consume it. Chapter 11, The Shadow That Strikes. The warning came too late. By the time the ANBU patrols noticed the shift in the air, the enemy was already inside. It began with the birds. Thousands of crows, black as tar and silent as death, descended from the gray morning sky, blotting out the sun and covering the village in a living storm of feathers and malice. The villagers ran screaming, children clutching at their mothers, shopkeepers abandoning their wares, shinobi scrambling to understand what was happening. The barrier squads activated the outer defenses, but they crumbled almost immediately, not from brute force, but from within, intricate seals, centuries old, twisted into mockeries of themselves by some unseen, impossible sabotage. In the heart of the chaos, shadows moved. Not shinobi. Not beasts. Something else. Figures robed in gray, their faces hidden by masks etched with ancient runes, slipped through the crumbling defenses like mist through a dying fire. They moved with a purpose. They were not here to raze Konoha to the ground in rage or conquest. They were here to dismantle it, methodically, ruthlessly, to rip it apart root by root, until nothing remained of the village that had once dared to call itself a light in the darkness. At the Hokage Tower, alarms blared as shinobi rushed to mount a defense. Kakashi barked orders, his Sharingan spinning violently under the stress, directing squads toward key points of defense, the academy, the hospital, the civilian sectors. But it was clear to anyone who had lived through the Fourth Great Ninja War that this was no ordinary attack. This was a precision strike. A death sentence delivered with surgical coldness. And Konoha was woefully unprepared. Naruto felt the enemy long before he saw them. He was standing atop one of the village's higher rooftops, surveying the initial waves of chaos, when he felt it, a pull in the air, a distortion of chakra that screamed of ancient power, of things that were never meant to walk among the living. Kurama growled deep within him, not in rage, but in warning. That's no human chakra. Naruto didn't hesitate. In a single bound, he launched himself toward the heart of the chaos. He landed hard in the middle of the village square just as the first of the gray-robed figures emerged from the swirling mass of crows. The villagers nearby stumbled back, gasping, some even falling to their knees at the oppressive weight of the intruder's presence. The masked figure tilted its head, studying Naruto in silence. And then it spoke, a voice that was not one voice, but a chorus of whispers, dry and cracking like ancient paper. "You are the error." Naruto's hands tightened into fists. "I've been called worse," he said grimly. Without waiting for a signal, two more robed figures materialized behind the first, moving with inhuman speed. They attacked as one, a wave of black energy, cold and hungering, surging toward Naruto with a force that warped the very ground beneath it. Naruto reacted instinctively, drawing on the golden chakra within him. He met the black wave with a barrier of pure natural energy, the impact sending shockwaves through the square, shattering windows and toppling market stalls. But even as he held the line, he could feel it. This power was wrong. Not like chakra. Not even like the corrupted energies of the 10 tails. Something older. Something fouler. Something that should not exist. Across the battlefield, Shinobi scrambled to organize a counteroffensive. Shikamaru directed units from a rooftop, his mind racing, already calculating loss ratios and fallback positions. Hinata, with Byakugan activated, fought alongside squads of Mednin, desperately trying to shield the civilians from the spreading madness. Sai summoned ink beasts to intercept smaller pockets of enemy forces, though even his creation seemed reluctant to touch the robed invaders. Everywhere, the shadows spread, devouring hope, feeding on fear. And at the center of it all, standing like a lone pillar against the tide, was Naruto Uzumaki. The fight was brutal. Naruto dodged and countered with flawless precision, unleashing Razengans, wind blades, and bursts of controlled natural energy with surgical force. But it was not enough. For every masked figure he struck down, two more seemed to rise from the roiling mass of darkness. Kurama roared within him, offering more power, but Naruto held back, refusing to let himself become the very monster the world already feared he was. He could not, would not, win this battle by unleashing blind devastation. He had to endure. He had to protect. Even if it cost him everything. And then, through the chaos, a new figure stepped into the square. Taller than the others, cloaked in a heavier mantle of gray, his mask not blank like the others, but inscribed with a spiraling rune that seemed to drink the light around it. The first voice. The true architect of the rising darkness. Naruto felt the world tilt around him at the sight of the figure, as if gravity itself bowed before this ancient malice. The first voice spoke, and though his words were barely above a whisper, they echoed through the square like the tolling of a funeral bell. "You will fall, child of prophecy," he said. "You will fall, and with you, the last hope of the weak shall be extinguished." Naruto stood his ground, golden energy flickering around him like the last stubborn light of a dying sun. "I've heard that before," he said, voice steady. "And every time, you lost." The first voice raised his hand. The shadows answered. And the true battle began. Chapter 12, Stand Alone. The first blow cracked the earth beneath Naruto's feet. The force of it was monstrous, a tidal wave of corrupted chakra crashing into his barrier, sending ripples through the village square and toppling nearby structures like toys. Villagers screamed. Walls buckled. The sky itself seemed to darken. And Naruto stood in the center of it all, alone. The first voice advanced with a slow, terrible grace, his every step warping the ground beneath him, as if the very earth recoiled from his presence. Around him, the gray-robed figures chanted in a tongue lost to history, weaving black tendrils of energy that slithered toward Naruto like vipers seeking to choke the light from his soul. Naruto's golden aura flared, struggling against the encroaching darkness. For a heartbeat, it seemed the world held its breath. Then the battle erupted. Naruto moved like a storm given form, a blur of gold and wind, his Rasengan swirling into monstrous typhoons that carved through the shadows. He ducked, weaved, countered. He unleashed bursts of sage-enhanced strikes that shattered stone and bone alike. He combined Kurama's chakra with natural energy, forging weapons of pure force, lashing out with controlled devastation. Each technique was precise. Each movement was deliberate. Because Naruto understood something that his enemies did not. True strength wasn't measured by how much destruction you could unleash. It was measured by how much you could choose not to. But even as Naruto fought, he knew, this was no ordinary enemy. The shadows did not fall like normal foes. When struck down, they withered, only to be reborn moments later, clawing their way back into existence with a hunger that could not be sated. The first voice did not attack with rage or recklessness. He moved with the inevitability of death itself, slow, patient, knowing that time was on his side, that exhaustion would eventually claim even the strongest of shinobi. And so Naruto endured. He fought for every inch of ground, for every terrified civilian hiding behind broken walls, for every piece of the village that still dared to hope. Above the battlefield, on rooftops and battered watchtowers, the shinobi of Konoha watched in stunned silence. They had feared Naruto. They had whispered about his power, about the threat he might one day become. And now, as he stood bleeding and gasping and refusing to fall against a darkness none of them could even comprehend, they realized how small their fears had been. They realized how much they had failed him. And they realized, too late, that without him, they would already be dead. Kakashi gritted his teeth, fists clenching at his sides. "Damn it," he muttered. Shikamaru, standing beside him, watched the battle unfold with grim understanding. "He's buying us time," Shikamaru said quietly. "And he's doing it alone." Hinata, her Byakugan activated, could barely stand to watch, every fiber of her being screaming to run to him, to fight beside him. But she knew. They would only slow him down. Naruto's battle was beyond them now. He fought not just with strength, but with something no amount of training could forge. He fought with a heart that refused to break. The first voice, sensing Naruto's exhaustion, pressed the assault. With a flick of his staff, he summoned a spear of pure darkness and hurled it with terrifying speed. Naruto barely managed to deflect it, but the force of the impact sent him skidding across the square, blood spraying from his mouth as he slammed into the remains of a stone wall. For a moment, the golden glow around him flickered. The first voice advanced, slow and certain. "This is the end," he said, voice like the grinding of tombstones. Naruto struggled to his feet. His body screamed in protest. His vision swam. Kurama roared within him, offering more power, offering the keys to unleash everything, to burn the enemies to ash, to level the earth itself if needed. "Let me out," Kurama snarled. "Stop holding back. They'll die otherwise. You'll die otherwise." Naruto's hands trembled. He could feel it, the edge, the terrible, seductive pull of absolute power. One step, one surrender, and he could end it all. But he would lose himself. He would become the monster they had always feared. He would prove them right. And so, through broken ribs, shattered breath, and a heart weighed down by betrayal, Naruto chose. He smiled. A small, weary, defiant smile. "No," he whispered. "I'm still me." He gathered what remained of his strength, drawing on the natural energy around him, feeling it pulse with life and hope, not hatred. His golden chakra blazed anew, brighter than before, fierce and pure. Naruto planted his feet firmly, summoned every ounce of willpower left in his battered body, and launched forward with a roar that shook the heavens. The final clash was a thing of raw, terrible beauty. Naruto's Rasengan, burning with the combined light of every bond he had ever fought for, slammed into the first voice's dark spear. The resulting explosion tore through the square, sending shockwaves across the village, shattering the black clouds that had covered the sky, letting sunlight pour through once more. When the dust finally settled, Naruto stood, barely conscious, blood dripping from a dozen wounds. The first voice knelt amid the ruins, his mask cracked, his body steaming from the force of the impact. Their eyes met, human and inhuman, and for a moment, silence reigned. "You are a fool," the first voice rasped. Naruto, swaying but unbroken, grinned. "Maybe." He collapsed to one knee, not from defeat, but from pure exhaustion. Around him, the shinobi of Konoha rushed forward, not to capture, not to exile, but to stand beside him. Finally. Belatedly. Rightfully. Above the ruined village, the first rays of morning light pierced the clouds, illuminating the battlefield with a quiet, solemn glow. Naruto Uzumaki had stood alone. But he had not fallen. And now, perhaps, he would no longer have to stand alone. Chapter 13, Ashes and Oaths. The morning sky above Konoha was painted with the dull glow of dawn, the first light glinting against shattered rooftops and jagged walls that bore the scars of war more vividly than any monument. The villagers moved among the ruins with solemn determination, their hands calloused from clearing rubble and salvaging what remained of homes and memories. In the heart of the village square, freshly planted seals gleamed faintly at every entrance, wards reinforced by Kakashi's careful hand and Shikamaru's meticulous strategy, silent promises that Konoha would stand, no matter how many times it was struck down. Naruto Uzumaki watched from a low wall, bandages wrapped around his shoulders and ribs, every breath a reminder of how close he had come to crossing the line between salvation and annihilation. Yet in that silent vigil, he found neither regret nor relief, only the heavy weight of responsibility pressing down on him more insistently than any enemy's attack. As workers lifted broken beams and children swept away the dust, Naruto walked among them, offering quiet words of encouragement rather than blazing demonstrations of power. Each nod of gratitude, each weary smile, cut through the lingering doubts that had haunted him since his return, forging a fragile bridge between his solitude and the village he had once loved unconditionally. Yet even as he guided a group of shinobi clearing debris from the hospital courtyard, he felt the still-present flicker of fear in the eyes of those he helped, a fear born not of his deeds but of the power he wielded, a reminder that heroism and terror often wore identical faces. It was only when a small girl, no older than 6, tugged at his sleeve and whispered, "Thank you, Naruto," that the last of the doubts loosened their grip on his heart, and he realized that redemption, like peace, had to be earned one frightened soul at a time. Inside the newly reassembled council chamber, the elders and clan heads gathered again, some with hands still marked by soot, others with robes singed along the sleeves. The air was thick with the scent of incense, burned not to mask odors of ruin but to sanctify the pledges that would be made on that ground. Kakashi stood at the head of the long table, his Sharingan covered by a single bandage, eyes heavy with fatigue yet unwavering in determination. "We owe Naruto more than we ever admitted," he began, voice calm but edged with steel. "He stood alone against a force none of us could even comprehend, and he refused to become the monster we feared. It is time we repay that debt." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room, though some voices remained silent, elders haunted by the memory of exile, clan leaders uncertain if the boy-turned-god they once cast aside could ever be trusted again. Naruto listened from the doorway, shoulders squared as he faced the council that had condemned him mere days before. When the elder with the hawk-like nose rose to speak, his tone was softer, less accusatory. "Naruto Uzumaki," he said, "in our fear we nearly lost everything. You have carved a path back to us through sacrifice and conviction. We offer you this sealed honor, not as a weapon, but as a symbol of our vow, to stand united, under your protection as you stand for ours." With hands trembling but voice steady, Naruto accepted the ceremonial scroll, an oath of unity and trust woven into ancient paper, its runes glowing with the resolve of every clan. Later, as the sunlight filtered through hastily repaired windows, Naruto made his way to the village's reconstructed training grounds. There, shinobi of all ranks practiced side by side, former rivals now shields for each other, forging steel and spirit in equal measure. He joined them without fanfare, matching strength and speed with young genin who had grown up hearing his legend, and with seasoned jonin who had once doubted his worth. Every clash of kunai and every resonant thud of impact echoed the promise they had made, that Konoha would rise from ashes stronger than ever, bound not by fear but by unwavering loyalty and shared purpose. That evening, Naruto convened a gathering outside the rebuilt Hokage monument, now draped with fresh banners bearing the symbols of every allied village that had sent aid. Representatives from the Hidden Mist, Hidden Cloud, and Hidden Stone stepped forward, each handing Naruto a sapling grown from the sacred forests of their lands, gifts of life and renewal. As he accepted each sapling, the weight of countless oaths pressed upon him, and he felt the trembling hope of a world yearning for unity. With solemn care, he planted the first sapling at the monument's base, promising that every leaf would bear witness to the peace forged in the crucible of war. The crowd watched in rapt silence as Naruto spoke. Voice carrying over the hushed assembly, "We have been tested by darkness and betrayal, and yet we stand here together. Let these trees grow as proof that unity can flourish even in the harshest soil. I vow to protect this village, and every shinobi who calls it home, with my life." When he finished, the gathered shinobi bowed in unison, not in fear, but in respect and renewed trust, an echo of the oaths they had once failed to uphold, now solemnly reclaimed. Under the lantern-lit sky, Naruto wandered through the village streets one last time before retiring for the night. Children practiced shadow clones with shy grins, elders shared stories of the boy who had become legend, and lovers strolled hand in hand beneath paper lanterns that flickered like distant stars. For the first time since his exile, Naruto felt a fragile warmth in his chest, a feeling not of acceptance earned through annihilation, but of belonging woven through shared struggle and mutual faith. As he reached the outskirts of the village, Naruto paused at the edge of the forest, gazing up at the newly planted saplings swaying gently in the breeze. The air was sweet with promise, carrying the faintest whispers of hope that spread beyond Konoha's borders to a world desperate for renewal. In that moment, he understood that oaths were not mere words bound by ritual, but living vows that grew stronger with every act of courage and compassion. With a quiet nod to the stars, Naruto Uzumaki turned back toward the heart of his home, ready for whatever trials awaited, knowing that he would never walk alone again. Chapter 13, Ashes and Oaths. The ruins of Konoha steamed under the morning sun. Ash drifted through the air like phantom snow, settling in the cracks of broken stone and splintered wood. Smoke rose from the shattered remains of the marketplace, the academy, the walls that had once seemed so unbreakable. The village had survived the night. But it had paid dearly for that survival. Naruto sat alone atop the battered Hokage monument, his legs dangling over the edge as he gazed down at the village he had once dreamed of protecting. His body was a map of pain, bruised, bloodied, every breath a reminder of the cost he had paid. Kurama lay silent inside him, spent but watchful, their bond deeper than ever after what they had endured together. Naruto didn't feel victorious. He felt hollow. Tired. And yet, in that exhaustion, there was a strange, fragile peace. He had chosen his path. And he had not faltered. Below, the villagers moved through the ruins like ghosts, salvaging what they could, comforting the wounded, burying the dead. But as they worked, their eyes turned, again and again, toward the figure on the monument. There was no hatred in their gazes now. No suspicion. Only something far heavier. Guilt. Regret. Odd gratitude too raw to find words. In the remains of the Hokage's tower, Kakashi stood with Shikamaru, Sai, Hinata, and the remaining council members. The walls were scorched. The ceiling sagged dangerously. But the council met anyway, because there was no more time for fear or hesitation. They had seen the truth. And the truth demanded action. Kakashi addressed the gathered shinobi with none of his usual detached humor. "We failed him," he said, his voice steady but hard. "We abandoned him. We betrayed him." He let the words hang, brutal and undeniable. Yet he chose to protect us anyway. Not because we deserved it, but because that's who he is. Around the table, there were nods, some hesitant, some shamefaced, some grimly determined. For the first time in a long time, Konoha was unified in something deeper than politics or fear. They were unified in gratitude. And in a quiet, burning resolve to never repeat their mistakes. Hours later, as the sun began to dip once more toward the horizon, a small group climbed the battered steps of the Hokage monument. Naruto heard them coming but didn't turn. He wasn't sure he had the strength for another argument, another attempt to convince people who had already made up their minds about him. But this time, he didn't hear accusations. He didn't hear suspicion. He heard silence. A different kind of silence. A respectful, hesitant, reverent silence. Kakashi spoke first. "You didn't have to come back," he said. Naruto gave a tired half-shrug. "I didn't come back for the council," he said quietly. "I came back for the people who still believe in what this place could be." A beat passed. Then Shikamaru stepped forward, scratching the back of his neck in that familiar, lazy way, but his eyes were serious. "You saved us," he said simply. Hinata stood beside him, her voice soft but unwavering. "You saved all of us." Sai said nothing, but he offered Naruto a rare, genuine smile, small, awkward, but real. One by one, more shinobi stepped forward, Jonin, Chunin, even a few academy students. Some carried bandages. Some still bore the blood and grime of battle. But they came. Not because they were forced. Not because they were ordered. Because they chose to. Kakashi produced a scroll, worn and stained with soot. It bore the seal of the Hokage's office, cracked, but unbroken. He unrolled it carefully, revealing a single, simple text. A new oath of allegiance. Not to the council. Not even to the institution of Konoha itself. But to the spirit that had saved them when they had abandoned him. To Naruto Uzumaki. "We can't erase what we did," Kakashi said. "We can't pretend it didn't happen." He held out the scroll. "But we can start again. Not because you need us. Because we need you." For a long moment, Naruto stared at the scroll. Memories flashed through his mind, the jeers of his childhood, the cold shoulders of his youth, the betrayal of exile. And yet, also the laughter of friends. The warmth of bonds forged in fire and loss. The stubborn, impossible dream of a world where no one was alone. Slowly, Naruto stood. He stepped forward, reaching out with a hand still scarred and trembling from battle. And with a firm, unshakable grip, he accepted the scroll. The village erupted into quiet applause, not loud, not raucous, but deep and sincere, like the heartbeat of something being reborn. For the first time in a long time, Naruto smiled. A real smile. Not the mask he had worn for years. Not the sad, broken half-smiles of a boy trying to hide his pain. But the smile of a man who knew exactly who he was. And knew that he was not alone anymore. High above, the first stars began to pierce the darkening sky. A reminder that even in the deepest night, light endures. And so too did Naruto Uzumaki. Stronger. Wiser. Still foolishly, stubbornly, gloriously himself. Chapter 14, The Second Horizon. Peace, if it could even be called that, did not last long. Barely a week after the dust had settled over Konoha, the messengers began arriving, battered, desperate, half-alive remnants from across the shinobi world, carrying broken banners and pleas they had once sworn they would never utter. The land of stone, proud and stubborn, sent envoys with trembling hands and hollow eyes, speaking of entire cities swallowed by the mist of darkness, of warriors vanishing without a trace, of leaders driven mad by whispers only they could hear. The land of lightning, so quick to flex its strength, now sent their last surviving generals to kneel in Konoha's ruins, confessing through gritted teeth that their armies had been devoured, not by shinobi, but by something they could neither see nor fight. The land of water, once feared for its brutal hunters and ruthless assassins, now sent only silence, their coastal villages abandoned, their seas boiling with corruption that tainted even the tides. The great shinobi world, so eager to destroy Naruto Uzumaki, had realized too late that he had never been the true threat. And now they had nowhere left to run. Naruto watched them arrive from the battered courtyard of the Hokage Tower, his arms crossed loosely over his chest, his expression unreadable. He listened as Kakashi read the reports aloud, the names of fallen villages and crumbling defenses tumbling from his lips like the litany of a dying world. He listened to the envoys, old enemies and false friends, as they begged for aid, their voices thick with the sour taste of humility. And he said nothing. Because he was tired of words. In the council room, heated debates erupted once again. Some called for isolation, to seal Konoha's borders, to let the rest of the world reap the chaos it had sown. Others called for vengeance, to let the darkness consume their enemies, weakening them for Konoha's future supremacy. Shikamaru, ever the realist, argued for caution. Saving them isn't mercy, he said, his voice like a knife cutting through the din. It's survival. If the world burns, we burn with it. Kakashi agreed, though his shoulders sagged with a weariness that no amount of strategy could erase. But in the end, all eyes turned to Naruto. It was no longer the council's decision. It was his. That evening, Naruto stood once more atop the Hokage monument, the battered village sprawling beneath him like a wounded but breathing thing. Hinata stood nearby, silent, offering her presence without demands. Kurama, resting inside him, spoke softly. You don't owe them anything, Naruto. They threw you away. You could walk away from this and be right. Naruto closed his eyes, breathing in the cool night air. I know, he whispered. But I'm not fighting because they deserve it. He opened his eyes, gazing toward the distant mountains, where the horizon was no longer pure but stained with the creeping black of the first voices spreading corruption. I'm fighting because it's still my world. And I won't let it fall. Not because they deserved saving. Not because he wanted their gratitude. But because he had never needed a reason to protect others beyond the simple, stubborn, unbreakable truth that he could. The next day, standing before the assembled forces of Konoha and the broken remnants of other villages, Naruto spoke. His voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the weight of everything he had endured, every betrayal, every sacrifice, every dream he refused to let die. We stand on the edge of the end, he said. You came here because you have nowhere else left to run. I didn't ask for your loyalty. I don't need your apologies. But if you want to fight, truly fight, then stand beside me. Not as soldiers for a village. Not as pawns for a council. But as people who still believe this world is worth saving. If you can't do that, leave. If you can, fight. There was no cheer. No resounding roar of affirmation. Only silence. And then, slowly, one by one, battered shinobi stepped forward. Old enemies. Old rivals. And behind them, their few surviving comrades. They chose to stand. Not because they believed in themselves anymore. But because they could still believe in him. Above them, the second horizon darkened, a wall of mist and shadow rolling ever closer, carrying with it the full force of the first voices gathering storm. The final war was no longer a question. It was coming. And this time, Naruto would not stand alone. Chapter 15, The Vanguard of Shadows. The earth shook beneath the march of the vanguard. Not the shinobi. The shadows. Across the northern plains, where once lush forests had stretched for miles, now only desolation remained, a barren, cracked wasteland stained black by the corruption leaking from the first voice's advance. In the distance, a wall of mist moved with terrible purpose, hiding within it thousands, tens of thousands, of robed figures. Not all were human. Some had been once shinobi, villagers, innocents, now hollowed into puppets, their bodies twisted by the unnatural force that consumed will and soul alike. And at the heart of it marched the generals of the first voice, towering creatures of darkness, wielding ancient weapons and powers that made the ground bleed where they walked. The second horizon was no longer approaching. It had arrived. Naruto stood at the forefront of the united forces, the ragtag army of Konoha, stone, cloud, mist, and scattered survivors formed into loose ranks behind him. He wore no armor, bore no banners. He needed none. His mere presence, the burning golden chakra that wreathed his body like a living flame, was more than enough. Behind him, Shikamaru coordinated the generals of the alliance. His mind working frantically to prepare for an enemy none of them fully understood. Beside Naruto, Hinata stood, her Byakugan active, scanning the mist for any sign of the enemy's movements. Kakashi, older now, but unbowed, watched silently, the Sharingan in his remaining eye glowing faintly beneath his forehead protector. Even the Raikage, battered but proud, stood ready, his fists crackling with suppressed lightning. They had come. Not as allies. Not as friends. But as warriors with no other choice. The first clash was not a roar. It was a scream. The mist struck with impossible speed, tendrils of black energy lashing out, seizing shinobi from the front lines and pulling them into the fog where their cries were swallowed whole. The ground erupted as shadow beasts, grotesque amalgamations of corrupted chakra, burst forth, tearing into the defensive lines. And yet, through the terror, through the panic, the shinobi held. Because at their head, Naruto moved. He was a golden hurricane, a force of nature. With each movement, he cut through the darkness. Raisengans imbued with natural energy detonated like miniature suns, clearing swathes of mist in flashes of blinding light. Where he stepped, the earth healed, grass forcing its way through cracked soil, life fighting back against decay. The enemy converged on him, sensing that if they could fell him, the entire army would crumble. But Naruto was no longer fighting for acceptance. He fought for life itself. And he would not yield. Kakashi led the counter-assault, moving in Naruto's wake, using his Sharingan to predict enemy movements and shield the rear guard. Shikamaru coordinated rapid trap deployments, using shadow possession jutsu to bind the most dangerous creatures long enough for demolition squads to finish them. Hinata, with a team of Byakugan users, pinpointed pockets of hidden threats, guiding strikes with precision impossible by normal sight. And Naruto carved a path forward, step by agonizing step, through an enemy that refused to die, that refused to be reasoned with, that sought only to consume. Hours blurred into a single endless battle. The sun sank behind the mountains, and still they fought. The mist thickened, the beasts grew more feral, the air itself becoming poison, thick with the taste of rot and despair. For every shadow they destroyed, 3 more rose. For every victory, the cost grew higher. Men and women who had once hated each other now fought back to back, bleeding together, dying together, driven by the only force stronger than hatred, survival. And still, Naruto stood. Bruised. Bleeding. But unbowed. Each blow he took was another barrier shattered. Each enemy he felled was another life bought for those behind him. He could not afford mercy. He could not afford hesitation. He fought with the fury of a dying star, refusing to let the light go out. Near midnight, a second wave of generals emerged from the mist. These were not mindless beasts. These were commanders of the first voice, corrupted shinobi of legend, warriors from forgotten ages resurrected and twisted into mockeries of their former selves. Among them, a figure in cracked crimson armor, once a hero of the stone, now little more than a puppet of darkness, led the charge. The united shinobi lines faltered under the renewed assault. The Raikage fell back, his arm shattered by an unseen force. Several squads were wiped out in seconds, torn apart by techniques that defied even the most ancient knowledge of ninjutsu. The line teetered on the brink of collapse. And then, once again, Naruto stepped forward. He gathered his chakra. Not recklessly. Not destructively. But with the precision of a man who knew the true weight of power. The ground split under the force of it. The mist recoiled, burning away in golden fire. Naruto extended his hands, palms open, and summoned a massive raisin shuriken, not one of pure wind, but infused with sage chakra, Kurama's chakra, and something deeper still, his own unbreakable will. He hurled it into the heart of the advancing enemy. The explosion lit up the night like the birth of a new sun, vaporizing the front lines of the enemy vanguard and scattering the corrupted generals. For a brief, blessed moment, the tide turned. And in that moment, the shinobi of the world, battered, broken, hopeless, found the strength to fight on. The battle was not won. It would not be won in a night. But it had been survived. And survival, in this war, was a victory of its own. As Naruto stood in the smoking crater left by his last attack, breathing heavily, blood dripping from 1,000 cuts, the surviving shinobi slowly gathered around him. Not cheering. Not saluting. Simply standing. Because they understood now. He was not just their weapon. He was not just their savior. He was their shield. And as long as Naruto Uzumaki stood, the world still had a chance. Chapter 16, Ashen Dawn. The dawn broke over a graveyard. The fields that had once been green and full of life now lay in ruin, churned into black mud by the footsteps of monsters, stained red by the blood of the brave. The fires from the night's battle still smoldered in the distance, casting long, jagged shadows across the broken earth. The mist had receded, for now, retreating like a living thing nursing its wounds, but its presence still lingered in the air, thick, oppressive, poisoning every breath. Victory was a lie. There were no victors here. Only survivors. Naruto stood in the center of what remained of the forward camp, his arms limp at his sides, his clothes torn and bloodied, his body screaming with exhaustion. He could feel the weight of every life lost pressing against him, a silent, crushing burden that no amount of strength could lift. Around him, the survivors moved slowly, tending to the wounded, gathering the fallen, rebuilding what little could be rebuilt. There were no songs. No cheers. Only the hollow scrape of shovels against broken ground. Only the low murmur of names spoken over fresh graves. Only the knowledge that they had survived one night at the cost of 1,000 others who had not. Kakashi approached quietly, his gait uneven, his Sharingan hidden beneath a blood-stained forehead protector. In his hands he carried a scroll, a simple thing, unadorned, unremarkable, but heavy with meaning. Naruto turned to face him, his eyes hollow but unbroken. "The council's dead," Kakashi said without preamble. Naruto blinked slowly. Kakashi continued, voice flat. "The stone's leadership was wiped out in the night. The cloud's generals are gone. The mist, barely anything left to call a chain of command." He held out the scroll. "They're asking you to lead." Naruto stared at the scroll for a long moment, the weight of the world reflected in the lines of his face. "I'm not a general," he said softly. Kakashi's lips curved into a bitter, almost fond smile. "Neither were you a savior. But you became one anyway." Across the camp, shinobi gathered, those who could still stand, those who had nothing left to lose. They looked to Naruto. Not with the blind adoration of children. Not with the calculating eyes of politicians. They looked to him because he was still standing. Because he had stood when they had fallen. Because, in a world crumbling into darkness, he was the last unbroken thing they could cling to. Naruto accepted the scroll. Not because he wanted to. Because someone had to. Because dreams alone could not rebuild the world. Only blood, sweat, and unrelenting will could do that now. And he was willing to pay the price. Later, in the largest remaining tent of the shattered camp, Naruto convened what could loosely be called a war council. Shikamaru, bruised and limping but sharp as ever, spread maps across a scorched table, marking the few remaining strongholds with grim efficiency. Hinata, her arm bound in tight bandages, used her Byakugan to monitor enemy movements in the distance, her face a mask of quiet determination. Sai coordinated what remained of the intelligence network, sending ink constructs racing across the countryside to scout for signs of the First Voice's next move. Others, the few surviving captains of the Stone, the Cloud, the Mist, sat in silence, their heads bowed, their pride broken, awaiting orders from the boy they had once sought to destroy. Naruto listened to each report carefully, weighing every word, every possibility. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of the coming storm. "We can't fight them like we fought each other," he said. "They're not interested in land, or politics, or revenge. They want the world itself. If we break, even for a moment, they will devour everything." He let the words sink in, watching as the remaining leaders straightened slightly, steeling themselves. "We'll form mobile strike units," Naruto continued, tapping points on the map. "Small squads. Fast. Hit them where they're weakest. We'll fortify every village left standing, but we won't wait behind walls. We bring the fight to them. And when the time comes..." His eyes hardened, the golden fire within them burning low and steady. "We take the war to the heart of the corruption itself." There was no applause. No cheers. Only solemn nods. Only warriors who understood that the path ahead led not to glory, but to blood and ash and sacrifice. But it was a path they would walk. Because Naruto Uzumaki would walk it first. And he would not walk alone. That night, as the survivors lit pyres for the dead, Naruto stood apart, gazing into the flames. Kurama rumbled within him, not with anger, but with something almost like pride. "You're different now," the beast said. "You finally understand." Naruto didn't answer immediately. He watched the smoke rise toward the stars, carrying with it the last prayers of the fallen. "I understand," he whispered at last. "I'm not fighting for a village. I'm not fighting for their forgiveness. I'm fighting for the future." And he would fight for it until his last breath. Even if the world broke around him. Even if he broke with it. Because that was the promise he had made to himself. Long before anyone else had believed in him. Long before anyone else had even known his name. Chapter 17, The Burning Map. The map of the world had changed. Not with the neat lines of diplomats and treaties. But with fire. Every village, every stronghold, every piece of once familiar ground was now measured not by who ruled it, but by who could still survive there. Entire provinces had vanished under the mist. Whole regions of once bustling cities were now lifeless husks, their populations consumed or twisted beyond recognition. The enemy moved like a disease, invisible at first, then unstoppable once it took hold. But now, finally, the shinobi had begun to fight back. And at the heart of every blow they struck, stood Naruto Uzumaki. The first missions were brutal. Naruto divided the forces into specialized units, small, mobile, lethal. Strike teams were deployed to cut off the advance of shadow beasts before they could overwhelm villages. Sabotage squads infiltrated mist-choked zones, destroying enemy nexuses that fed the corruption. Rescue units moved behind enemy lines, pulling out what few survivors remained hidden among the ruins. Losses were heavy. Some teams never returned. Others returned broken, their bodies marked by curses and energies that even the most skilled Mednin could barely understand, let alone heal. And yet, each victory, no matter how small, carved a wound into the enemy. Each life saved was another spark against the darkness. Each outpost recaptured was a foothold gained. Naruto led from the front. Not from a throne. Not from behind walls. He fought with his people, bled with them, bore the weight of every name lost with a quiet, unyielding determination that became the backbone of the new alliance. To see him on the battlefield, a golden beacon against the churning sea of mist, was to remember why they fought at all. It was not for territory. Not for vengeance. It was because he made them believe that survival was still possible. That tomorrow could still be reclaimed. In a battered command tent lit by sputtering lamps, Naruto stood over the main war map, listening as Shikamaru debriefed the latest missions. The parchment was a patchwork of red and black. Red for what had been lost. Black for what had been devoured completely. Only a handful of blue markers remained, outposts still holding, tiny embers in a world rapidly slipping into darkness. Shikamaru tapped one such ember, far to the north, deep within a mountain range that had once belonged to no nation. Our last scout team picked up traces of concentrated activity here, he said. Heavy chakra signatures. Old world symbols. It matches the patterns we've seen in the first voice's movements. Naruto narrowed his eyes. Their base? Shikamaru nodded grimly. Their heart. Kurama stirred inside Naruto, a low rumble of anticipation. Cut off the heart. And the body dies. Naruto said nothing, but the fire in his eyes spoke volumes. Across the tent, Kakashi leaned heavily against a table, his breathing slightly labored but his gaze sharp. If it's true, Kakashi said, then this is our only shot. Hit them before they can fully consolidate their forces. Before they can unleash whatever final weapon they're building. But it'll be a slaughter, Sai added quietly, rolling up fresh intel scrolls. They'll have fortified it beyond anything we've faced so far. Hinata stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. And if we wait, it'll only get worse. Silence settled over the tent. Everyone knew what was being asked. Not just another battle. Not just another strike. A full assault. A march into the mouth of the abyss itself. Naruto looked around the room, at Shikamaru, still carrying the weight of too many calculations, at Kakashi, the weary veteran who had seen too many wars, at Hinata, whose courage had never once wavered, even when her heart broke. He saw the faces of the few who still stood. The last light of a dying world. And he made his decision. Not as a Hokage. Not as a hero. But as Naruto Uzumaki. We strike, he said. And we don't stop. Not until the heart is torn out. Not until the first voice is silenced. Not until this world is ours again. The War Council broke into immediate action. Plans were drawn. Missions were assigned. Last-minute alliances were confirmed. Across the battered camp, Shinobi prepared, sharpening blades, weaving final seals, whispering last prayers to gods who had long since stopped listening. Because they understood. This would not be another skirmish. This would be the endgame. Victory or annihilation. No middle ground. No retreat. As Naruto stepped out into the cold night, the stars overhead seemed farther away than ever, mere pinpricks against an endless void. But he didn't falter. He had walked this far not because he believed he would be welcomed. Not because he believed he would be remembered. He walked because someone had to. Someone had to believe that tomorrow could still be won. Someone had to carry the fire into the night. And Naruto Uzumaki had never let the fire die. Chapter 18, March into Oblivion. The march began in silence. No banners. No songs. Only the steady, grim rhythm of footsteps grinding against the broken earth. The assembled forces moved like a slow tide across the dead lands, a sea of battered armor and weary faces hardened beyond fear. Above them, the sky was a vast dome of shifting ash, blotting out the sun, casting the world into a perpetual twilight. Ahead, beyond the final ridge, lay their destination. The heart of darkness. The source of the corruption. The throne of the first voice. It was not a fortress of stone or metal, as some had expected. It was a wound. A vast crater torn into the earth, from which the mist spilled in thick, oily tendrils, writhing as if alive. At its center rose a black spire, jagged and unnatural, a monument to a hatred older than nations, older than history itself. Around the spire coiled the enemy's true defenses, not walls, not weapons, but an endless army of shadows, bodies twisted and broken, bound together by threads of foul energy, their forms flickering between the human and the monstrous. Waiting. Watching. Hungering. Naruto stood at the head of the formation, golden chakra pulsing faintly around him, a beacon of light in a world that seemed determined to forget what light had ever meant. Behind him, the strike squads tightened their ranks, eyes grim. Shikamaru directed the tactical deployment, assigning squads to key positions with a speed born of desperation and necessity. Hinata scanned the field, her Byakugan burning, identifying enemy clusters hidden within the mist. Kakashi and the remaining captains coordinated the defense perimeter, knowing that the first wave would be the bloodiest. Everyone knew. They would not win this battle by strength alone. They would win it by refusing to fall. The first signal was a whisper. Not heard, but felt, a ripple through the ground, a vibration in the chest, a pulling at the soul. And then the mist exploded. The army of shadows charged, a black tide screaming across the wasteland. They moved with no fear, no hesitation, no regard for self-preservation, only a mindless, consuming will. The first impact was cataclysmic. Shinobi clashed with monsters, their jutsu lighting the darkness with desperate flashes. Wind blades severed grotesque limbs. Flames devoured twisted flesh. Seals flared and detonated, sending shockwaves through the enemy ranks. But for every creature cut down, two more took its place. And behind the frontline horrors, something worse loomed. Towering beasts formed from dozens, hundreds of bodies fused together, their roars splitting the air like thunder. Naruto moved like a golden tempest, carving a path through the enemy ranks, his Raisin Shuriken tearing through abominations with searing precision. Kurama's chakra wrapped him like a second skin, every blow a fusion of natural energy and raw will. Yet even he could feel it. The enemy was not merely numerous. It was endless. For every shadow he destroyed, he felt the strange, sickening pull, a twisting of the world itself, as if reality was being bled dry to birth more of them. And then, during the chaos, came the revelation. Sai's ink hawks, scouting deep into the mist, transmitted images back to command. What they showed made even the veterans falter. The heart of darkness was not simply spawning soldiers. It was consuming souls, the dead, the dying, even the wounded left unattended, feeding on their essence, twisting their chakra into new weapons for the first voice. Every loss on their side strengthened the enemy. Every death was recycled into another monster. It was not a battle of attrition. It was a slaughterhouse feeding itself. In the command tent, Shikamaru slammed his fist into the table, his usual calm cracking. "If we keep fighting like this," he growled, "we're handing them victory with every drop of blood we spill." Kakashi nodded grimly. "We need to reach the spire," he said. "Cut it off at the source. End it before there's nothing left of us to save." Hinata turned to Naruto, her voice steady despite the horror etched across her face. "You're the only one who can break through." Naruto met her gaze. He saw the truth there. He had known it from the beginning. This was not a battle that could be won by armies. It was a battle that would be won, or lost, by him. Alone. Naruto took a deep breath, feeling the weight settle on his shoulders, heavier than any mountain, sharper than any blade. He turned to his friends, his comrades, his family. "I'll make a hole," he said. "You follow." He didn't wait for their agreement. He didn't need it. They trusted him. And he trusted them. With a roar that shattered the unnatural silence, Naruto unleashed his full power. Golden chakra flared outward, a tidal wave of life forcing back the mist, tearing apart the nearest shadows, burning through the corruption with purifying light. He charged forward, a living spear of will and fury, carving a path straight toward the heart. Behind him, the forces of the allied villages rallied, surging into the breach he had made. It was a desperate gamble. A last stand. A march into oblivion. But they followed him. Because in that endless night, he was the only thing left that still remembered how to burn. Chapter 19, The Last Bridge. The world blurred into chaos. Naruto pushed forward, every step a battle against the tide of darkness that sought to smother him, every breath a defiance against the whispering winds that promised peace if he would only kneel. Around him, the mist thickened, not just as a physical veil, but as something more insidious, a psychic storm that clawed at his mind. Dredging up every doubt, every regret, every whispered fear he had tried so hard to bury. The ground under his feet cracked and bled black liquid. The air itself tasted of ash and rot. The sky, if it still existed above the suffocating mist, had been swallowed by a void that stretched without end. And still, he moved forward. Because there was no path back. There was no salvation waiting for him if he faltered. Only the cold certainty of oblivion. Behind him, the combined forces fought desperately to hold the corridor open, their jutsu flashing against the endless press of shadow beasts, their screams muted by the suffocating press of mist. Kakashi, bleeding from a gash across his side, directed squads to fallback positions with ruthless efficiency. Shikamaru, moving with grim focus, unleashed complex shadow bindings to buy precious seconds. Hinata led the medics, her Byakugan searching frantically for the wounded, pulling them from the jaws of the abyss wherever she could. Every moment Naruto bought with his forward march was paid for in blood. But they kept buying it. Because they believed. Because he had given them no other reason not to. At the edge of the heart, the landscape shifted. The mist thickened into walls. The ground twisted into grotesque mockeries of familiar places, shattered ruins resembling Konoha, fragments of memories turned inside out. And standing between Naruto and the towering black spire at the center of the heart, there rose a figure. At first, he thought it was another of the corrupted generals. But as he drew closer, he realized with a sickening jolt. It was himself. Or rather, a perfect mirror. A Naruto who wore his face, his voice, his very memories. But whose eyes were dead, cold, empty, merciless. The shadow Naruto stepped forward, radiating a suffocating, oppressive aura. You could have ruled, it said, voice smooth and venomous. You could have bent the world to your will. You could have ended the cycle of hatred by force. Naruto stood still, his heart pounding. He knew this voice. It was the whisper that had haunted him in his darkest nights. The temptation he had buried under mountains of willpower. The cost he had always refused to pay. The shadow raised a hand, and the mist around them condensed into scenes, visions of a world where Naruto had taken power by force, crushing resistance, forging a cold, silent peace over a terrified world. A world without war. A world without freedom. A world without life. You could still choose it, the shadow said. One act of surrender. One step into the abyss. And all the pain ends. Naruto's hands clenched at his sides. The images pulled at him, every fiber of his battered soul yearning for release, for simplicity, for the end of endless sacrifice. But then he remembered. He remembered Iruka's smile. Jiraiya's laugh. Sasuke's stubborn glare. Hinata's trembling confession. He remembered bonds, messy, painful, beautiful bonds, the chaos and hope of a free world. He remembered why he fought. Not for peace bought with chains. But for a future earned by the right to choose. Naruto breathed deeply, gathering not his chakra, but his will. He stepped forward. I'm not here to rule, he said, voice steady as steel. I'm not here to end pain. I'm here to protect the chance for people to live. To love. To fall. To rise again. The shadow hesitated. Cracks spread across its perfect reflection. And then Naruto moved, not with hatred, not with rage, but with the quiet, unstoppable force of conviction. He struck the shadow with a Rasengan not fueled by anger, but by every bond he carried. The impact shattered the imitation, the mist exploding outward in a burst of golden light. When the smoke cleared, Naruto stood alone before the spire. And waiting for him at its base, cloaked in the writhing mist, was the true architect of the nightmare. The first voice. He was larger than Naruto had imagined, not physically, but in presence. A gravity that distorted the air around him, that made every breath feel like dragging knives through his lungs. His mask, unlike those of the other robed figures, was not blank. It was carved with ancient, weeping symbols that seemed to bleed darkness. The first voice raised his head, regarding Naruto with something almost like curiosity. "So you made it," he said. His voice was not a whisper now. It was a roar wrapped in silk. "You stand alone against the end of all things." Naruto straightened, battered but unbowed. "I've stood alone before," he said. "And I'm still here." The first voice laughed, a sound like the grinding of tombstones. "You are a flickering candle, boy," he said. "And I am the night." Naruto's chakra flared, golden and brilliant against the choking mist. "Then I'll burn bright enough," he said, "to set the night on fire." The first voice extended a hand. The ground trembled. The final battle began. Chapter 20, When Light Refuses to Die. The first clash split the earth. Naruto moved with a speed that shattered the corrupted ground beneath him, golden chakra roaring around his body like a second sun. The first voice answered with a surge of darkness so dense that it seemed to swallow sound itself, a gravity well of hatred that pulled at every molecule of existence. When their attacks met, the explosion rocked the heart of darkness to its foundations, sending shockwaves through the mist, tearing gashes in the sky. The armies far behind them staggered under the impact, shinobi and shadow alike thrown to the ground as if by the hand of an angry god. But neither Naruto nor the first voice faltered. They were beyond such things now. This was no longer a battle between two men. It was a battle between two visions of the world. Naruto unleashed a barrage of Rasengans, each one enhanced by natural energy and Kurama's burning chakra, their spiraling cores tearing holes through the mist, blasting apart the lesser shadows that dared approach. The first voice countered not with traditional jutsu, but with pure force, manipulating the very fabric of the corrupted world, twisting it into lances, barriers, chains of condensed hatred that slashed at Naruto from every direction. They clashed again and again, moving faster than the eye could follow, every collision tearing another piece from the ruined landscape. The heart of darkness itself screamed under the strain, its unnatural existence beginning to crack as the sheer will of two titans ripped through it. Yet even as Naruto fought with everything he had, he felt it, the cost. Every technique drained him more than it should have. Every injury, even the smallest cut, took longer to heal under the oppressive weight of the heart. Kurama roared within him, offering more and more of his chakra, but even their combined strength was being leached away by the very environment itself. The heart was not just a fortress. It was a trap. A battlefield designed to wear down hope. To make even the strongest light flicker and die. The first voice saw it. He pressed the attack, his strikes becoming more brutal, more relentless. "You fight for chaos," he said, his voice resonating through the very ground. "For weakness. For the right to fall." He unleashed a wave of black fire, twisting through the air like a living thing, forcing Naruto to dodge, his body screaming in protest. "Order is peace," the first voice continued. "Order is salvation. You would have them live in pain, in conflict, in endless failure, just to cling to your broken ideals." Naruto countered with a Rasen shuriken, its edges crackling with raw life force, slicing through the black fire and forcing the first voice back a step. He panted, blood dripping from a wound on his forehead, but his eyes, gods, his eyes, burned brighter than ever. "You don't get it," Naruto said, his voice rough but steady. It's not about being perfect. It's not about winning every time. It's about standing up every time we fall. It's about choosing to live, even when it's hard. It's about fighting for a tomorrow we might never see, because someone has to. The first voice laughed, a hollow, pitiless sound. And when you fall? Naruto clenched his fists, his golden chakra flaring until the mist recoiled. Then someone else will stand. And if they fall, someone else after them. And it will never stop. Because that's what it means to be alive. The final exchange began. The first voice summoned a monolithic spear of shadow, larger than any building, and hurled it with a snarl that shook the corrupted earth. Naruto, drawing on the last reserves of Kurama's chakra, the last threads of natural energy, and the burning core of his own indomitable will, forged a Rasengan so massive it blotted out the darkened sun above. The two forces collided midair. The impact was apocalyptic. The heart of darkness shattered, the black spire exploding into shards that rained down like meteors. The mist screamed, a sound not of wind or matter, but of dying will. The earth heaved and split. And when the smoke cleared, the world held its breath. Naruto stood, his body broken, barely upright, golden light flickering around him like the dying embers of a once mighty flame. Across from him, the first voice knelt, his mask shattered, revealing a face ravaged by age and madness, his body dissolving into the mist that had birthed him. You will fail. The first voice rasped, even as his form crumbled. Naruto stepped forward, his voice quiet, final. Maybe. But not today. The first voice's remains dissolved into dust, carried away by a sudden, gentle breeze. The heart of darkness collapsed inward, the mist evaporating like smoke under sunlight for the first time in what felt like an eternity. Behind Naruto, the shinobi forces surged forward, clearing the remnants of the corrupted army. The war was not over. Pockets of darkness would remain. Wounds would take generations to heal. But the heart of the nightmare had been destroyed. The tide had turned. Naruto fell to his knees, the strength finally leaving his battered body. Hinata was the first to reach him, collapsing beside him, her hands desperately searching for wounds to heal. Kakashi knelt a moment later, his eyes soft with pride and sorrow. Shikamaru stood back, head bowed, a rare, grim smile on his lips. Around them, the survivors gathered, shinobi of every village, every land, every shattered nation. They didn't cheer. They didn't shout. They simply stood. In silent, reverent recognition. Because they knew. They knew who had carried them through the night. Who had refused to die when the world demanded surrender. Above the ruined battlefield, the first real dawn broke, pale and thin, but real. A new beginning. Bought with pain. Forged with fire. And carried on the shoulders of a boy who had once been called a fool. A boy who had become the hope of the world. Naruto Uzumaki. The light that refused to die. Chapter 21, The Weight of a New World. Victory tasted like ash. In the days following the fall of the Heart of Darkness, the world held its breath. The mist receded. The shadow beasts that had once seemed endless withered into dust, their unnatural existence finally severed from the poisoned root that had birthed them. The sun, long absent, returned, pale and hesitant at first, as if unsure it was still welcome. The rivers, once choked with corruption, began to flow clean again. The earth itself, scarred and blackened, showed the first brave signs of healing, tiny blades of grass pushing through the broken soil, stubborn, unyielding, alive. But even as nature began to remember what life meant, the survivors did not rejoice. There were no grand celebrations. No triumphal marches. Only the silent work of the living, gathering the dead, tending to the wounded, rebuilding from nothing. Victory had come, but it had not come without a cost. And no one knew that better than Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto sat on the edge of a ruined wall that had once been part of a village square, now reduced to rubble and ash. His body still ached from wounds that even the most skilled medics could not fully mend. But it was not the physical pain that weighed him down. It was the faces. The countless faces he had seen fall. The friends who would not rise again. The villages that would never be rebuilt. The dreams that had burned away in the endless night. And yet, despite it all, despite the crushing weight of guilt and grief, Naruto did not regret standing. Because if he had not, there would have been nothing left to grieve at all. The provisional leaders of the surviving villages gathered under a makeshift tent at the new central encampment. There was no formal council anymore. No borders. No titles. Only a broken collection of warriors and survivors, clinging to the fragile hope that a future could still be forged from the ruins. Naruto entered the tent slowly, every eye turning to him, not with suspicion, not with fear, but with a reverence so raw it almost hurt to see. He had not asked for this. He had not fought for it. But he had become it. The symbol of their survival. The foundation of their hope. Shikamaru, now effectively the strategist for the remnants of the shinobi world, unrolled a battered map onto the table. "There's no more hidden villages," he said bluntly. "Not the way they were." He pointed at vast swathes of red. Too much was lost. He gestured to a few isolated points of blue. Only scattered strongholds remain. Pockets of resistance. Naruto nodded slowly. He had known it would be bad. But seeing it laid out like this, the death of a world he had once dreamed of uniting, was a different kind of wound. The wreckage, or what was left of him, leaned forward. "We can't go back," he said gruffly. "If we try to rebuild what we had, we'll only repeat the same mistakes. We need something new." The Mizukage, her arm in a sling, nodded in agreement. A world without endless borders. Without hidden wars. A murmur of assent rippled through the room. For once, there was no hunger for power here. Only exhaustion. Only the desperate desire not to see everything they had fought for burned away in pride and politics. All eyes turned to Naruto. It was not a command. Not an expectation. It was a request. A plea. "Let us." Not as a ruler. Not as a conqueror. But as the beacon you have always been. Naruto looked around the room, at the bruised faces, the haunted eyes, the hands that still trembled from too much loss. He saw not soldiers. Not enemies. Not strangers. He saw people. He saw lives. He saw a future. One that would be harder to build than any war he had ever fought. But a future worth fighting for. He stepped forward, placing his hand on the battered map. "Then we build it together," he said. "No more hidden villages. No more hidden wars. We stand as one world. One people. And if anyone tries to drag us back into darkness, we'll face them. Together." His voice did not rise in volume. It didn't need to. Because it carried the only thing that mattered. Conviction. Hope. Life. Outside the tent, as the new alliance began to form not with contracts but with shared resolve, Naruto stepped into the first rays of a new sunrise. The world stretched before him, scarred, battered, grieving. But alive. And it was his to protect. Not as a weapon. Not as a god. But as Naruto Uzumaki. The boy who had been shunned. The shinobi who had been exiled. The man who had refused to let the world die, even when it had asked him to. He would carry the weight of this new world. He would bear every burden it asked of him. Not because it was easy. Not because it was fair. But because someone had to. And he had always known that, in the end, it would be him. Chapter 22, The Seeds We Plant. Building a new world was slower than surviving the old one. In war, decisions were made in the blink of an eye, lives spent and saved in heartbeats. But in peace, or what fragile thing passed for peace now, every decision weighed heavier, took longer, and carried with it consequences that would stretch far beyond the next breath, the next day, the next lifetime. Naruto realized this quickly. He had always been a creature of instinct, of motion, of heart. But now, as he sat at the center of a growing network of villages, camps, and strongholds slowly knitting themselves together into a fragile tapestry of cooperation, he understood, instinct alone would not be enough. This was a different kind of battle. A battle for the soul of a world reborn. And it demanded patience, strategy, vision. The first seeds were planted with careful, deliberate hands. The remaining shinobi of the great villages, leaf, stone, cloud, mist, and sand, came together not to rebuild what had been, but to forge what could be. There were no more Kage. No more shadow rulers. Only a council of equals, each leader carrying not the authority of conquest, but the burden of survival. Naruto refused any official title. He would not be a king. He would not be a general. He would be a voice. A light. A reminder. And it was enough. The first laws were simple, born from the hard-earned lessons of blood. No hidden armies. No secret alliances. No village could claim superiority over another. Disputes would be settled by council, not by battle. The ink was still wet on the first treaties when the first cracks appeared. Some of the old guard, veterans too steeped in the ways of the past, chafed at the new order. There were whispered meetings behind torn walls. Whispers that Naruto was too young. Too idealistic. Too dangerous. That without the clear structures of the old system, chaos would reign. In one ruined town in the western hills, a group of former stone shinobi tried to re-establish a private militia, hoping to carve out their own small kingdom amid the wreckage. When the council confronted them, they responded with violence. Naruto went himself. He didn't go with an army. He didn't go with threats. He walked into their camp alone, golden chakra humming quietly around him. And he spoke. Not as a conqueror. Not as a ruler. But as Naruto Uzumaki. I didn't fight to build a new world just to watch us tear it apart, he said, standing before their raised weapons, unflinching. I'm not here to force you to believe in this. I'm here to show you that you can. He lowered his arms, exposing his heart. Choose, he said simply. Live in the light. Or rot in the ruins. The weapons lowered. Slowly. Reluctantly. But they lowered. Because they understood. Not through fear. Not through coercion. But through the undeniable, infuriating, breathtaking power of belief. The militia disbanded. Their leaders, under Naruto's urging, joined the reconstruction teams, helping to rebuild homes instead of fortifying walls. It was not perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was a beginning. Hinata worked tirelessly to coordinate the medical corps, ensuring that survivors across every land, shinobi and civilian alike, received the care they needed. Sai took charge of education, using his ink creations to bring books, tools, and knowledge to villages too small to defend themselves in the old world. Shikamaru, despite the weariness etched into his bones, designed the first outlines of a true unified communication network, using a blend of chakra, seals, and old technology salvaged from the ruins. Piece by painful piece, the world began to stitch itself together. Not as it had been. But as something new. Something better. Something still fragile, still unfinished. But alive. Late one evening, Naruto stood atop a newly built tower overlooking the growing settlement at the heart of the Alliance, a place still too new to have a name. He watched the lights below, flickering torches, chakra lamps, campfires. Signs of life. Signs of hope. Hinata joined him, silent at first, simply sharing the space. You always knew, didn't you? She said after a long while, her voice soft. Knew what? He asked. That you weren't just fighting to end the darkness. You were fighting to plant something in its place. Naruto smiled, tired but real. Maybe, he said. Or maybe I just didn't want the world to forget how to dream. She reached out and took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. And together, they watched as the first real city of the new world began to breathe its first uncertain breaths. The seeds were planted. Now they had to grow. And Naruto Uzumaki, stubborn as ever, would be there to guard them. Through storms. Through fire. Through whatever new darkness dared rise. Because that was the promise he had made. Not to a council. Not to a village. But to everyone who still dared to believe that light could be born from the ruins of night. Chapter 23, The Price of Peace. The hardest battles were fought in silence. As the days bled into weeks, and the first new villages rose from the bones of the old, Naruto began to see it, the cracks in the foundation they had barely begun to lay. Not all wounds healed with time. Some festered. Some grew. And some never closed at all. At first, the problems seemed small, almost mundane compared to the horrors they had faced. Disputes over supplies. Arguments over land. Old rivalries flaring up when shinobi from different villages were forced to work side by side. But beneath the surface, darker currents stirred. In the west, remnants of the stone complained that they bore the burden of the rebuilding effort disproportionately, muttering that they should have a greater voice in the council. In the south, former cloud shinobi whispered that the new laws weakened them, that a return to the old ways, power through strength, was the only path to true security. Even in Konoha survivors, those Naruto trusted most, he saw flickers of uncertainty. Whispers that maybe, just maybe, they had given up too much. That maybe peace without clear leadership, without strict control, was an illusion. That maybe another war was inevitable, and they needed to be ready. The seeds of unity Naruto had planted had taken root. But weeds had grown with them. And they were spreading. At a council meeting beneath a half-built hall of stone and timber, the tension boiled over. A representative from the stone, a grizzled man named Kento, slammed his fist onto the table. You preach unity, he growled, glaring across the room at the cloud delegates. But when bandits raided our supply caravans last week, where was this unity? The cloud envoy, a younger shinobi named Rika, sneered. Maybe if your scouts weren't half-blind, they'd have seen the ambush coming. The room erupted into shouting. Naruto stood silently, watching them tear at each other with words sharper than kunai. He let it go for a moment. He wanted to see. To know. And what he saw chilled him. These men and women had fought side by side. Had bled together. Had buried their dead together. But now? Now they clung to old identities like lifelines. Stone. Cloud. Mist. Sand. Still clinging to names carved into the bones of a broken world. Still seeing each other as threats first, neighbors second. Still fighting old wars in new colors. Naruto stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam his fist. He simply spoke. And the room went silent. You want to rebuild the past, he said quietly. But the past is dead. He looked at each delegate in turn, his gaze sharp as forged steel. We didn't survive the heart of darkness because of old flags. We didn't survive because we fought for a village. We survived because we fought for each other. He gestured around the table. For this. For the chance to build something better. If you throw that away now, if you let fear and pride drag us back into the pit, then every life we lost was wasted. Every sacrifice meaningless. He leaned forward, voice steady. If you want war, then go ahead. Pick up your old banners. Gather your old armies. He straightened, golden chakra flickering around him in a quiet warning. But you'll have to get through me first. The silence that followed was suffocating. No one moved. No one spoke. Because they knew. They remembered. After the meeting, Shikamaru found Naruto sitting alone on a low wall, watching the workers raise the first real monument of the new world, a statue not of a hero, but of a circle of hands clasped together. "You handled that better than I thought you would," Shikamaru said, sitting down beside him with a grunt. Naruto shrugged. "I'm tired of fighting," he said honestly. "But I'll fight for this." He nodded toward the statue. "For them. For us. For what we could still be." Shikamaru gave a dry, tired chuckle. "You always were the stubborn one." Naruto smiled faintly, the expression tinged with exhaustion but not defeat. "Some things never change." But as the sun dipped below the horizon and the world bathed itself in blood-red light, Naruto knew, the hardest battle was only beginning. Not a battle of fists. Not a battle of chakra. A battle for the soul of the world they were trying so desperately to rebuild. And he would fight it. Every day. Every step. Until the world no longer needed a shield. Until the world could stand on its own. Even if he had to carry it there. One broken piece at a time. Chapter 24, The Fault Lines. Peace was not broken in explosions. It cracked in whispers. In the weeks that followed the council's first collapse into arguments, the fractures within the fragile new order widened. Small groups of survivors, former stone, former cloud, even former leaf, began pulling away from the central rebuilding efforts, citing everything from lack of representation to distrust of their former enemies. Some simply vanished into the wilderness, taking supplies, weapons, and precious medical stockpiles with them. Others stayed behind, seeding the camps with fear. Fear that the new world was nothing more than a dream. Fear that Naruto, no matter his intentions, had too much power. Fear that survival required a return to the old ways, the ways of strength, of division, of endless vigilance against one another. The seeds of rebellion had been planted not by hatred, but by fear. And fear was harder to kill than any army. Naruto sat in the command tent, listening to Shikamaru list the latest reports. Another food caravan hijacked. Another construction site burned under the cover of darkness. Another group of refugees refusing to submit to the council's authority. "We're bleeding," Shikamaru said bluntly, pointing to the growing red markers on the new map. "If we don't act, it'll spread." Kakashi leaned forward, arms crossed. "You need to hit them back," he said. "Fast. Hard. Before this becomes something bigger." Hinata flinched at the words, but said nothing. Naruto stared at the map, feeling the weight of it pressing against his chest. Not just the tactical weight. The moral weight. He could send squads after them. He could stamp out the rebellion before it took root. He had the power, the authority, the loyalty. But at what cost? Would he be saving the dream? Or would he be becoming exactly what he had fought to destroy? A dictator, cloaked in good intentions. That night, Naruto walked the perimeter of the main settlement alone. The stars above seemed distant, uncaring. The fires of the camp flickered weakly against the vastness of the night. He remembered walking these same paths long ago, when he had been a boy dreaming of acknowledgement, of being seen. Now the world saw him. And it feared him. Not because he was cruel. But because he could choose to be. Because he had the strength to decide the fate of thousands with a word, a gesture. And that was enough. Kurama stirred within him, grumbling low. "You're hesitating." Naruto smiled grimly. "Yeah. They'll tear each other apart if you don't act." "I know. You could crush them. End it before it starts." "I know." Kurama rumbled again, neither scolding nor encouraging, simply observing. "You're walking a thinner line than ever before, kid." Naruto tilted his head back, staring at the stars. I didn't fight to be a tyrant, he whispered. I fought so they could choose. Even if they choose wrong. The next morning, he called a meeting. The leaders came, wary, expectant. Waiting for orders of war. Waiting for decrees of punishment. Waiting for the iron fist they feared he would finally raise. Naruto stood before them, tired, battered, but unbowed. He spoke simply. We're not building a world ruled by fear, he said. We're not hunting down those who disagree. If they leave, let them. If they fight, we'll defend ourselves. But we will not become what we destroyed. We will not force unity with blades at their throats. He let the silence hang. Some looked relieved. Others looked furious. But no one spoke. Because deep down, they knew he was right. Because deep down, they were terrified he wouldn't be strong enough to hold the dream together without becoming a tyrant. And terrified he would. Afterward, Hinata found him standing alone, watching the first caravans leave, groups of dissenters, carrying what little they had, vanishing into the horizon. She stood beside him without speaking for a long time. Finally, she whispered. You gave them freedom. Naruto closed his eyes. I gave them a choice. That's what we fought for. He smiled, a small, sad smile. And that's the price of peace. Letting people choose, even if it breaks your heart. Far beyond the settlement, hidden in the forests and ruins of the old world, the splinter groups gathered. Some would find their way back in time. Some would not. Some would build small, stubborn new lives. Others would rot in bitterness and resentment. And a few, a dangerous few, would not be content with simply leaving. They would plot. They would wait. They would plan the fall of the dream Naruto dared to build. Because not everyone could live in the light. Some still belonged to the shadows. And the shadows were not done with the world yet. Chapter 25, The Last Choice. The new world was not broken by war. It was almost broken by fear. The first whispers came from the south. Scattered reports of a new settlement rising among the ruins, not a village, not a camp, but a fortress. A place built on rejection of the new order. A place where old banners were stitched back together with blood and bitterness. A place that called itself by a name Naruto had hoped he would never hear again. The Hidden Fang. They rejected the council. Rejected unity. Rejected peace. Their leader was not a Kage, not a general, but something more dangerous. He was a survivor. A shinobi named Kagen, once a respected jonin of the stone, now a messiah for the angry, the lost, the vengeful. And he had one simple creed. Strength rules. The strong protect themselves. The weak serve or fall. In the shattered hearts of those who feared change, it was enough. It always was. When the first Hidden Fang patrols raided a council convoy, Naruto sent envoys. When the envoys were returned in pieces, he sent warnings. When Kagen publicly declared Naruto the false prophet, the betrayer of shinobi pride, and the enemy of strength, Naruto understood. There would be no negotiations. No peace. Only one final choice. The council assembled. Fewer now, some lost to rebuilding, some to disillusionment. They argued late into the night. Strike first, crush the Fang before they grew stronger. Wait, build defenses, hope the threat would wither without a fight. Shikamaru argued for a swift surgical strike. Kakashi, wearier than ever, said nothing, only watching Naruto with tired, knowing eyes. Hinata said what no one else dared. You can stop them, Naruto. You have the power. You can end this, before it begins. The words hung heavy in the air. Because they all knew the price. If Naruto used his full power. If he unleashed everything he had buried for the sake of the dream, he could wipe Hidden Fang from the earth. Easily. But at what cost? What would be left of him after that? That night, Naruto stood atop the rebuilt tower at the center of the new city. The wind tugged at his cloak, the stars above seeming farther away than ever. Kurama stirred within him, restless. "They're testing you," the fox rumbled. "You could end it now. Fast. Brutal. Clean." Naruto closed his eyes. "I could," he whispered. "But if I do, what do we become?" Kurama was silent. Because he knew. Because Naruto knew. Because everyone, deep down, knew. At dawn, Naruto walked alone into the wastelands south of the city, toward the place where Hidden Fang gathered its armies. He did not bring an army. He did not bring banners. Only himself. Because this, the final choice, had to be made not by power, but by will. The battlefield was a broken plain, scattered with the ruins of the old world. Across it stood Kagen, clad in armor scavenged from fallen heroes, flanked by thousands of shinobi who had chosen pride over hope. He smiled when he saw Naruto. "Come to kneel, Uzumaki," he called. Naruto stopped 100 paces away. "No," he said simply. "I came to give you a choice." The army laughed, a low, cruel sound. Kagen stepped forward, confidence radiating from every scarred line of his body. "You think you can stop us alone?" Naruto's chakra flickered, not as a threat, but as a reminder. He could. He could tear this army apart with a thought. He could burn the Fang to ash before they even screamed. But that would not be victory. That would be the beginning of the next war. Naruto raised his voice, letting it carry over the ruins. "You have a choice," he said. "Live free. Build something better. With us. Or cling to the old world, and die with it. No threats. No promises. Only truth." For a moment, the plain held its breath. Kagen sneered. "You're weak," he spat. "You offer mercy because you fear strength." He raised his hand. A signal. Thousands of shinobi shifted, preparing to attack. Naruto stood still. And spoke one last time. "I'm not offering mercy. I'm offering hope. But if you force me to defend the dream we built." He drew a deep breath, and his golden chakra flared so brightly that the ruins glowed. "I will." The light was not angry. It was not violent. It was simply there. Unyielding. Undeniable. A reminder of everything they had once dreamed of before fear poisoned them. In the silence that followed, something cracked. Not in the earth. Not in the sky. In the army. One shinobi lowered his blade. Then another. Then another. A ripple of hesitation spreading through the ranks. Because deep down, even in their fear, they remembered. They remembered the boy who had stood when no one else would. The boy who had fought for them, not against them. The boy who had carried the world on his shoulders when they were too afraid to lift it. Kagen roared in fury, charging forward, his blade raised high. Naruto caught the blow with his bare hand. Golden chakra wrapped around the blade, shattering it into dust. He looked into Kagen's eyes, and saw not evil. Only fear. Only pain. Only a man who could not imagine a world where strength was not the only law. Naruto released him. Turned his back. And walked away. Behind him, the army broke. Some fled. Some fell to their knees. Some, ashamed, followed after him. Kagen stood alone, surrounded by nothing. He screamed into the empty air. But no one answered. Because the world had already moved on. When Naruto returned to the city, he carried no trophies. No spoils. only a heavier heart. The council waited for news. He simply said, "It's over." And for the first time, truly, it was. Months passed. The world healed slowly. The divisions never fully vanished. There were still arguments. Still mistakes. Still human flaws. But there was no new war. No new tyrant. Because they remembered. Because they chose. Because Naruto gave them the right to. Years later, as a new generation of shinobi played beneath the rebuilt towers, Naruto stood at the edge of the training fields, watching them. Hinata stood beside him, their hands brushing. Kakashi sat nearby, pretending to nap but smiling under his mask. Shikamaru grumbled about paperwork from a shaded bench. And Naruto? Naruto smiled. Not because the world was perfect. Not because he had won. But because the light still burned. Because the dream still lived. Because when darkness rose, when fear whispered, when doubt poisoned the heart, there would always be someone who remembered. Who stood. Who refused to let the light die. Naruto Uzumaki. The boy who never gave up. The man who taught the world to hope again. The light that refused to die. Epilogue, a world that chose to live. The seasons turned. The scars of war faded, some slowly, some never at all, but life, stubborn and relentless, pushed forward. The new world was not a perfect world. It had no single leader. No shining capital of flawless justice. No utopian peace free from mistakes and stumbles. It was a world of slow rebuilding, of hard compromises, of people who argued, doubted, sometimes even fought. But who remembered why they fought in the first place? It was a world that had chosen to live. Not because it was easy. But because it was worth it. At the heart of this world stood a city without walls. A place where former enemies raised their children together. Where flags of old villages hung side by side not as claims of power, but as memorials to the past they had chosen to rise above. The central square bore no statues of kings or generals. Only a wide stone circle, engraved with hundreds of names. The fallen. The lost. The dreamers. And at the very center of the circle, carved deeper than any other words, for simple ones. For those who chose to hope. Naruto Uzumaki lived simply. No palace. No guards. No thrones. He lived in a small house on the outskirts of the city. A house where the door was never locked, where laughter spilled from open windows, where the smells of cooking and the sounds of stories filled the air. Children often gathered at his porch, asking him to tell stories of the old days, of the Nine Tails, of the Heart of Darkness, of the war that had nearly ended the world. He always smiled, ruffled their hair, and said, "Those are old stories. Let's make better ones." Hinata sat beside him on quiet evenings, their fingers intertwined as they watched the next generation sprint across the fields, their shouts of joy rising into the soft summer air. Kakashi still visited, usually with a new book tucked under his arm and an endless litany of complaints about the damn paperwork of running a new academy. Shikamaru, now somehow lazier and busier at the same time, occasionally dropped by only to fall asleep on Naruto's porch after 2 sentences of conversation. Sai and Ino opened an art school in the city, teaching children how to create instead of destroy. Even Gaara sent letters, dry and formal but filled with a warmth Naruto could always feel between the lines. The world moved on. Not forgetting. Never forgetting. But not trapped by the past either. One evening, long after the children had gone to sleep and the fires had burned low, Naruto stood alone under the stars. He closed his eyes, feeling the wind on his face, the hum of life in the earth beneath his feet, the steady, stubborn heartbeat of a world that had refused to die. Kurama stirred within him, older, slower, but still very much present. "Not bad, kid," the fox muttered, half grudging, half proud. Naruto smiled, opening his eyes. Not bad at all. He didn't need statues. He didn't need songs. The real victory was right here. In every laugh, every argument, every newborn cry, every sunrise. The real victory was life. And it was enough. As he turned back toward the house, to Hinata's warm smile, to the flicker of the hearth fire, to the future still unwritten, Naruto Uzumaki carried with him the only legacy that ever mattered. Not that he had been the strongest. Not that he had been the savior. But that he had been the one who refused to stop believing. The one who had stood against the end. And chosen to live. For everyone. For everything. Forever. Sparkle's final words, last quotes from the characters. Naruto Uzumaki. The real fight was never about winning. It was about making sure the next generation didn't have to. Hinata Uzumaki. Hope doesn't have to shout. Sometimes it's just holding someone's hand and never letting go. Kakashi Hatake. Protect the next generation better than we protected ours. That's how we truly win. Shikamaru Nara. Peace isn't the absence of trouble. It's choosing to get up and fix things anyway. Sigh. Art and life are the same. Both are messy. Both are beautiful. Gaara. Even sand, scattered by the wind, can find its way home again. Kurama. TCH, stupid human. But, you did good. Mantelpiece clock mini epilogue, 10 years later. Naruto became exactly what he had once dreamed of, not a symbol of war, but a symbol of life. He no longer leads armies, no longer commands councils. He teaches. He listens. Sometimes, he just sits quietly in the village square, watching the children laugh, and knows, it was all worth it. Hinata founded the world's first academy for all, a school not just for shinobi, but for every child, teaching history, peace, and compassion, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. Shikamaru remains the shadow strategist of the unified council. He grumbles every day. Dreams of retirement, and yet somehow still prevents disasters before they even begin. Kakashi finally, truly retired. He spends his days reading in the park, telling half-true, half-wild stories to curious children, and occasionally dropping sharp advice when least expected. Sai and Ino run a vast network of art schools and recovery centers for children orphaned by war, helping to rebuild not just homes, but dreams. Gaara remains the leader of the United Sand region. His people no longer fear hunger or despair. They believe in him, just as he once believed in Naruto. The world is not perfect. It still stumbles, still argues, still struggles. But it stands. It breathes. It lives. And for Naruto Uzumaki, that was always the dream worth fighting for. Candle the Golden Final, Naruto's memorial inscription. Here lies Naruto Uzumaki, the boy who chose hope over hatred, light over fear, life over power. He taught the world to stand, to dream, to love, and to live, not because he was the strongest, but because he never gave up on tomorrow. Erected by a world that still stands because he believed it could.